Chapter 51. The Battle for the Sage's Seal 5. Name, Ed Roths Taylor. Gender, male. Age, 17. School year, 2nd. Species, human. Achievements, none. Vitality, 12. Intelligence, 10. Dexterity, 13. Willpower, 10. Luck, 8. Combat skills details. Magic skills details. Life skills details. Alchemy skills details. It was the start of another day's work as the sun slowly rose and the early morning air calmly breezed through the forest. If it were a weekday, I would normally have woken up quickly, jumping out of bed and putting on my exercise clothing before I began my run towards the teacher district. Since it was a holiday, I could be a bit more relaxed. My body felt refreshed. From the moment I got out of bed, I noticed that my body was back in perfect condition. Health really was so strange, as you didn't even feel the weight of its importance until you were already sick. I really needed to start taking good care of my body and stop pushing myself. I couldn't get sick like that again. I picked up the passed out Yennecar and I laid her on top of the bed. Then I went out to the stream to wash my face with cool water. While I was there, I decided to check my stats and found that, compared to Taylor's early mid-core stats, mine were also keeping pace. Simply put, it would become harder to keep up with Taylor as his growth rapidly changed in the second half, but at least I was able to raise my core stats as much as I could. That was just how much my stats growth had plateaued. Whether it was skill proficiency or core stats, I knew that my growth would slow down once I passed level 10. Though, I did still feel a bit frustrated seeing the way the growth rate declined. From that point on, each time I raised my stats I would definitely feel the effect. Rather than blindly training without any results, I needed to come up with more of a systematic plan. Come to think of it, I've barely done any research on the magically engineered items. Life skills details. Grade, intermediate craftsman, specialized fields, woodworking, handicraft level 14, design level 10, collecting skills level 13, woodworking level 13, stonemason level 6, hunting level 10, fishing level 7, cooking level 6, repairing level 5, less than advanced production technique slot, spiritual infusion greater than, technical proficiency, 2, power amplification, 3, infusion success rate, 91, fire-related spiritual proficiency, 4, wind-related spiritual proficiency, 2, contracted spirit, low-ranking fire spirit mug, spiritual resonance level, 12, spiritual understanding level, 12. Unique skills, blessing of fire fortune, explosion. Less than advanced production technique slot, magic engineering greater than. Technical proficiency, 2. Magic engineering understanding, 3. Fast production, 3. Collected production formulas. Weak wind generator, level 1. Loud noise generator, level 1. Automatic resonance magic power chessboard, level 1. Question mark 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 question mark. Analyzing. Question mark question mark question mark question mark question mark. Analyzing. Advanced production techniques had a major impact on core stats, and were also very versatile, so it couldn't simply be compared to a regular skill. However, as useful as it was, training it was difficult. It would have been nice if I could just use spiritual injection like a factory, constantly pumping them out. However, for each spirit that used spiritual injection, there was a certain recovery period that was needed before you could do the next one. It was like a cooldown timer. Magic engineering, on the other hand, could be trained freely, as long as you have the conditions for it. Preparing the right conditions was quite difficult. Just by researching the already completed magically engineered items, I was able to gain some proficiency in the skill. If I was lucky, I could also resemble the items. That would teach me the production method, as well. However, it was standard that, for most magically engineered items, you actually needed to acquire the production method itself. The efficiency of doing so was also better. The problem was that production formulas for magically engineered items mostly came as rewards in the main storyline quests. That meant it would be difficult for me to get my hands on them. Should I ask Taylor? There's no way he'll give them to me. No, he can't in the first place. I sat on a flat rock by the stream as I got lost in my thoughts. The production formulas for the magically engineered items were knowledge, rather than physical objects. Since Taylor didn't have any particular intention or reason to train his magic engineering, it seemed like a waste. If that was the case, then, as the main storyline progressed, wouldn't it be fine for me to take care of the scroll-type production formulas that dropped? Taylor wasn't going to train in magic engineering anyway, so the magic engineering production formulas wouldn't be anything more than pieces of paper to him. There was also a high chance that he just wouldn't even take them. Techniques were like gold mines to me. Once I graduated from Sylvania and started living on my own, it would be immensely helpful in making a living if I was able to train a reliable skill like magic engineering to its limit. In fact, I was even well informed of where and what ways the important production formulas were dropped or hidden. If I could catch and get a hold of them, it would greatly help my skill proficiency. Teaching myself by repeatedly disassembling, analyzing, and then reassembling the products Lortel managed to supply me with clearly had a limit in terms of my growth. I was starting to feel the importance of securing efficient, useful, and expensive magic engineering production formulas. Come to think of it, it's almost the end of Act 2. I've been training out of my mind, not to mention the fact that I was unconscious for 10 days, so it's gone by in an instant. In the middle of the tranquil forest, right at daybreak, I gazed up at the sky. It was a peaceful sight to look at. But when I closed my eyes, I could imagine the scene of the Tower of Magic Power. It engulfed the entire sky over the school, and Glast had imbued it with celestial magic. Using high-ranking time-related magic, creating and using all kinds of golems and experimented monsters, and even using his own disciples and other academic staff members as shields, he was a madman scholar that had finally gained resonance with the Sage's seal. The final chapter of Act 2, the Glast subjugation. Thinking that far, the memory of his research room flashed across my mind. The Soul Library. I clenched my fist and nodded my head. There were 4 stages of battle in the final chapter. A detour to the teacher's district, the underground waterways, Glast's secret research room, and the top of the Tower of Magic Power. Among them, Glast's secret research room was notorious for being long and difficult, but it also had the Soul Library, which had a collection of all sorts of valuable magic books, references, and priceless magic documents. It was a stage where you had to run around and catch the librarian, who would fly through the plentiful bookshelves and magic books. The stage's boss, the librarian of the Soul Library Reina, was hard to defeat without the use of the Swordmaster's skill. Well, even though things were like that, Taylor's present specs should have been high enough to defeat her. I'd already asked around for information, so I was sure he was fine. My interests were in a different area, the contents of the Soul Library. It was full of valuable magic engineering production formulas. As far as I could remember, the number of them was in double digits. Plus, there were 2 in particular that could produce legendary-grade magically engineered items. If it was a magically engineered item of a legendary grade, as long as you can get the materials to make it, it could be a lethal weapon close to the level of the Swordmaster's skill. It might not be able to keep up with the uniqueness of the Swordmaster's skill, which was effective when fighting against particular storyline bosses, but the sheer firepower of a weapon at that level couldn't be easily ignored. I searched through my memory carefully. Glock's eyes temporarily amplified your innate amount of magic power and all resonance-related skills proficiency. Delheim's sandglass reverted all physical conditions back a few seconds. Glock's eyes, if I could use that, I'd be able to temporarily amplify my spiritual resonance. That would allow me to make a contract with a high-ranking spirit, which I normally wouldn't be able to do at my level. Delheim's sandglass, there was a high possibility that it would be the key to saving my life at least once in a desperate situation. I couldn't just ignore them. I can't let this golden opportunity slip through my fingers. The advanced production techniques for magic engineering had a uniquely designed balance to them. As for grant-type skills such as spiritual infusion and enchant, you could only be granted those advanced skills once your body raised its proficiency and mana resonance to a high enough level. However, for production-type skills like magic engineering, it was balanced by the rareness of materials. In other words, no matter what type of advanced production formula I got my hands on, if I couldn't get the materials for it I wouldn't be able to utilize the power of an advanced magically engineered item. No matter how early you obtained a legendary type production skill, it wouldn't mean much if you could only obtain the items in the latter half of the storyline. That meant that the system was designed to prevent players from making excessively strong magically engineered items at the current point in the storyline. Luckily for me, though, I had a friend that could give me a chance. She was a main character in the storyline, one who I'd been trying not to get close to as much as possible. However, she could get any material she wanted, even if it was on the other side of the map. I didn't know what she would ask for in return, but the fact that I had a source in the first place was the important part. If all went well, I'd be able to work with a level of magically engineered items that shouldn't even exist in the current ongoing storyline. Just what are you thinking so hard about? As I turned around, trembling, I saw a girl with reddish-brown hair sitting on a fallen tree. I thought she had said that braiding her hair over one shoulder was more comfortable, but I'd been seeing her with her hair unbound or neatly combed recently. I thought her hair was always braided when she was working. I wasn't sure, but you showed up right away. Oh my, have you been thinking about me this early in the morning? I'm embarrassed. Seeing her smile, she looked more like a girl her age than a merchant. But that quiet voice of hers and insidious smile made me rethink that. Don't you know, many a little makes a mickle. Something that starts off small will build up into something bigger. If you want to get rid of me, you will have to try harder, Tilda. I didn't even realize you were nearby. When did you get here? That's a secret. It's been quite a while. Lortel jumped off the fallen tree, trying to catch her balance. I've been so busy that I haven't been able to see you lately. At that rate, I thought I might have forgotten what you look like. It would have been great if you had the sense to visit my store. You already knew about my situation. Well, thanks for the furniture. Yeah, Lortel strode up to me with a coy expression, grabbing my shoulder and lightly pushing me. She made me sit back down on the rock. Then, after looking me up and down with a sour expression, she let out a deep sigh. I'm relieved to see that your condition has returned to normal. I was so surprised by it all. It's also a relief to see that you look healthy. Do I look healthy? I'm already suffering from chronic fatigue. My hair has become all frizzy, and I've gone through so much to stop my face from getting puffy. There are so many things I need to deal with, and I also have to head back and take care of my schoolwork. Even though you're so busy, you came all the way to the northern forest. Well, I need to rest when I can. Also, I have something I need to tell you. After saying that, Lortel pushed on my waist. She was trying to tell me to make some room, since the rock was so small. Moving my butt over, I made some room for her to sit. Sitting down gently, she looked at me with a satisfied smile. It's about what Ziggs told me. How if I bought the sage's seal and showed it to you, you would do anything I ask. I took a deep breath. It was an urgent situation. Even though I needed to keep Crepin in check immediately, since I had overworked myself by passing out, I had no choice but to take care of it in any way possible. And this was the result. Once my father's dismissal is completed and the transfer of power from the head seat is finished, the Elt Company is planning to change its name. Wouldn't it be sort of weird to call it the Elt Company when Elt has been dismissed? So, we are planning on completely reorganizing the company's structure. Until then, I'm thinking that we will get rid of the name, Elt Company, and use a simple name like, Top Class, instead. There's going to be many personnel changes, and in the process my authority and influence will definitely become stronger. From just that much, I could get a rough idea of what Lortel was trying to say. It was a specific type of kidnapping called, scouting. Once the business branch's restructuring is complete, we will need a lot of new hands on staff. It will be a pretty high-up position, too. From employee management, asset management, sales flow, and even external affairs, you will oversee nearly everything. You will practically be one of the few people at the top with major authority. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Imagine that. When we wake up in the morning and go to work in the company's building, there will only be a single wall between us. How great of a deal is that? As I was one of the people with authority back when it was the Elt Company, I'll still have a decent share of personal assets that I will share with you. We will be just like a married couple, oh my, why do I keep running my mouth and saying such nonsense? Ha 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 ha. By the middle of her speech, I could feel Lortel getting carried away in her excitement. She was usually so calm and collected, but she was so excited that she was talking rather quickly. Seeing her smile, it didn't match that insidious smile that I had seen earlier. I was confused as to what rhythm she wanted me to dance at. We will occasionally see each other at work, and we will exchange glances and greet each other. When we go to the front together, we might have challenging times, and even be suspicious of each other, but, they say that the ground will harden even after it rains, right? As long as we have each other's back as we develop the company, eventually the sun will rise again. As we slowly age, we will also become much more skilled in managing the company. So even though we made a lot of enemies on the way, at least we will be strong allies to each other. Ed, I've seen you be quick-witted, intuitive, and you also seem to have good sense when it comes to bookkeeping and personal management. You will definitely be an amazing merchant. Lortel. She was going to give me a key corporate position at her company, share some of her private assets with me, and even my living conditions would improve greatly. It was a mouthwatering offer. But there were many reasons why I would have to swallow my spit. Needless to say, the events that would take place in Sylvania would ultimately also affect the world. I couldn't rely on the temporary emotions and skill set of a successful merchant like Lortel, or invest my entire life in such a risky job. Above all else, Lortel's behavior was completely irrational, unlike her usual self. Going this far just for me, it's too strange. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Calmly bringing up the reality of it all, as if she realized it herself, Lortel got rid of her disgraceful appearance. You really don't know anything. What? I know how you are feeling, Ed. Just what is wrong with that girl? You can't agree to such a major deal based on a little girl's momentary feelings. That must be what you're thinking. I'm sure that you just want to keep a business relationship with me, up until the very end. I didn't say that. That's how people usually feel. But there is something that you don't know. Lortel lowered her shoulders as she continued to speak in a dispirited voice. Do you know what you start craving the most in the world of business? Do you know what the most important thing is when living in a world where every little gesture, or every slight breath you take, changes the entire flow of hundreds of gold coins? One where, if you don't stab someone else in the back first, you will be the victim. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. A person that will never betray you. Even if everyone else in the world turns their back on you, a person that will always stay by your side. A person that, if you wake up one day and all the money you've saved up vanishes, will stand by you. To some, it might be their family. To others, perhaps a lover. Or maybe it was an ally that had been by their side for decades. Even though her life had been short thus far, Lortel must have witnessed the rise and fall of some of the greatest merchants of all time. As was often the case for those who lived a life blinded by greed, she must have always been alone and miserable. The fact that she might one day be the one that falls, that fear would always live deep inside the hearts of those who stood on top. There was no way for her to know if the people around her were looking at her for who she was, or if they were looking at the tower of gold coins under her feet. That was why, if you needed that sort of relationship, you would have no choice but to make it yourself. There's only one way to get such a person. Looking past their interests, all you can do is share each other's feelings and help one another. It was nothing special and nothing all that great. It might be in line with buying a meal for a friend who didn't look like they were in a great spot. It was common in a person's social life for someone that helped you when you were having a tough time to later develop into a better and closer companion. People who trusted each other in hardships would never betray each other. Maybe her story was something like that. However, Lortel's actions showed a different type of urgency. Lortel, who lifted both her hands to hold my right hand in between hers, spoke with a weakened face. Nothing more and nothing less. Can't you please just stay by my side, Lortel? Then, I eventually said it. First, stop laughing. Then you can try asking me again. Ah, you didn't fall for it. Lortel burst into laughter as she put down her clasped hands, leaning back. Seeing her come back to her usual self, she was like a fox wagging her tail. That's too bad. I almost had you. Your voice was getting too excited in the middle of your speech, you little I'm only human, so I couldn't help but get a little excited. How was it, though? Did it trigger your protective instinct at all? Usually, by showing someone my vulnerable side like that, their heart would begin to tremble. Well, it did wake me up. What a shame. Though, still, Lortel lowered her head as she added on something else. Not everything I said was a lie. There was a long moment of silence. For a while, I stayed completely still, listening to the rustling of the leaves and the flowing stream. Surprised by the sudden silence, I turned my head to try and look at Lortel. For some reason, she had lowered her head even further, hiding her expression underneath her hood. I couldn't guess the reason at all, whether she was embarrassed, regretful, happy, or sad. I'm planning on graduating from Sylvania. Until then, I don't have any intention of leaving school. I could list many reasons. There were all the disasters that would take place at Sylvania. That was the most important reason. It was also the only place that I could use my future knowledge. That means that, at least until I graduated, there was no better place than the school for me to efficiently develop my growth. Other than that, it was to lay the groundwork for surviving alone in the world, without having to rely on anyone else. Plus, I didn't want the time and money I spent already to go to waste. As for what I'm going to do after graduating, I haven't decided that yet. Well, I guess you could just wait until graduation. But Ed, did you know, you don't have a choice in the first place? Lortel smiled as she took out a piece rolled up parchment from her pocket, then she pressed it against my chest. Accepting it, I unrolled it to see, the certificate of sale for the Sage's Seal. When I looked up, Lortel had moved far away before I had even realized it. I couldn't see her expression well because of the robe, but hearing the tone of her voice, she must have had a wide smile on her face. It was nice to see you again after such a long time. I'll come back with my free pass soon. Unfortunately, it was my victory. Completely certain about the turn of events, Lortel trotted off and disappeared into the woods. Only then did that appearance of the rare, one-of-a-kind female merchant finally return. I sat by the stream, scratching my chin a few times. Thinking about what was going to happen later, I felt like I had done a really terrible thing to Lortel. From Lortel's point of view, I didn't think she would have figured it out yet, but still, I felt like it left a debt on my heart. That was dangerous. Lortel was already out of her mind, fighting back the smile that threatened to cross her face. After suffering through a heavy workload, she came to see Ed's face for healing. However, halfway through she had to put all her concentration and thought into maintaining her facial expressions. Originally, she had planned to approach him calmly and show him the certificate of sale. She planned to declare, "You're mine, now," and end it there. But when she saw Ed contemplating in the early morning sun, her plan was disrupted. Either way, she ended up speaking nonsense, and went completely off track from her original plan, but it was a relief that her fox-like merchant persona seemed to be well maintained. If she had left even a bit later, surely her true expression would have been exposed. I couldn't even give him his change. Most of the money Ed had was in gold coins. The price of the magically engineered items he'd bought from Lortel for cheap were paid using a single gold coin. Lortel had put the change in her leather bag before coming. Since she didn't know when she would be able to visit the camp again, she felt uneasy pushing it back any further. That being said, she didn't have the confidence to see Ed's face again. Instead, she went behind the stream and headed back towards Ed's camp. As long as she threw it somewhere near his cabin, Ed would be able to find it and take care of it. The distance between the stream and the camp wasn't that far. Lortel was going to stop by quickly and place the leather bag near the campfire in the middle of the camp, where he could clearly find it. Thud. At that moment, the door of the cabin opened. Yennecar walked out holding onto Ed's pillow, yawning with messy hair. Yawn. Ed went to the stream. Yennecar had seen Ed go out towards the stream while she was pretending to be asleep. She hadn't slept because of the exhaustion that was flooding her body and the nervousness from spending a night in the same room as Ed, so she had pretended to sleep without saying anything, but she actually ended up falling asleep like the innocent girl she was. Before I head back, I should at least eat something simple. Rubbing her eyes as her vision started to come back, she made eye contact with Lortel, who was coming from the stream. Seeing each other's faces was a disaster in their eyes. "Why are you coming out of there, Yennecar? Why are you coming from the stream, Lortel?" It was also the beginning of a new disaster for Ed. I sat alone by the stream, looking towards the slowly rising sun. With this newly refreshed body, I was encouraged to get started on some work. I slowly stood up and turned around. I remembered the 3 letters that I received before I collapsed from overworking. One was a letter from Lortel, which contained a message to take care of myself, as Eltie's movements were suspicious. Another was a personal letter from Princess Peenia, who was trying to summon me for information regarding the Roths-Taylor family, since Crepin's movements were suspicious. And the last letter had come from the school. The person who had sent it to me was completely unexpected. The senior professor in charge of the first years, Glast. It was a message saying that he wanted to meet with me personally after the academy's scheduled training at the end of the month. Sadly, as I was still unconscious during that time, I couldn't go see him. There's no way for me to know why he had called on me, or what he had wanted to discuss. Act 2 was now coming to its final stage, and his story was reaching its end as well. Chapter 52. Glast Subjugation 1. Lucy always laid down facing the stars. Laying down on the rooftop of Trix Hall, looking up at the sky, the twinkling starry night high above her and pressing down like a comfortable blanket. The heat and cold weren't particularly important factors for Lucy, as she wore various protective magics over herself. However, being in the sunlight, having a good view of the open sky, and hearing the occasional rattling of the leaves or the flowing of the stream were more important to her than you would think. On the other hand, being completely blocked in by walls and ceilings wasn't good. That's why she didn't like Ophelis Hall, despite the well-lit, sunny rooms, the expensive beds, and the high-class bedding. Even though the maids were neck-deep in work because of the half-destroyed Ophelis Hall, the maids still didn't slack when it came to keeping tabs on Lucy. Every day, they made sure Lucy wore her freshly cleaned uniform properly and neatly as they gently combed her white hair, which tended to fly all over the place. Even then, her behavior was still no different than that of a stray cat on the street. "There is no end when it comes to learning, Lucy. I'm sure that Mr. Sylvania must have also thought the same thing. That old man." The worn-out wizard hat full of creases, originally worn by the magician Glocked before he gave it to her, held the fragrant scent of rosemary. Sniffing the sleeves of her clothes, she could smell the same scent. While Lucy was sleeping, the maids continued to do the laundry as they saw fit. Suddenly, she remembered the day Glocked passed away. A day where the rain poured down heavily. The memory of the time she sat down in Glockt's cabin, holding onto his hat as she blew away all those who approached him, felt so far off and distant, like the starry sky. She even attacked those who tried to touch the Archmage Glockt's corpse as they pleased. Compared to that time, had she become gentler? Though, compared to back then she hadn't exactly become any more dependable. Rather, it was more appropriate to say that she had become lazier. Aside from the maids, there was no one left to discipline Lucy. If you were to ask if her life had gotten boring, she wouldn't think so. Even on the rather confined Akan Island, there was a surprising number of beautifully scenic views, delicious food to eat, and many crazy events. Most of the time, Lucy, who was distant because of the hardships she had experienced in her life, found none of it interesting. Either way, it didn't seem as if her life was particularly boring. You may have been born with the natural gift of talent and the blessing of the stars, but that's no excuse to stop learning, Lucy. Even if everyone in the land of learning is beneath your talent, there must definitely still be something there for you to learn. That's why you must always be learning. Be humble and use your power for the sake of everyone. And, be careful of the loneliness that will one day slowly creep up on you. With the strength to defeat everyone else, it is bound to be accompanied by a bitter loneliness. Lucy, I am sorry that I am leaving you first. The form that loneliness takes differs from one person to another. The cold blade of loneliness would eventually find everyone, in some way or another. But Lucy was still too young to understand that fact. Even now, that fact still hadn't touched her heart. That tingling feeling inside of her was closer to longing than loneliness. He was like an old man that would nag her all day long. Whenever she was asleep out on the outskirts of the magic forest, he would lift her up and throw her aside, always getting angry while scolding her. Though, now that he was gone, there was a strange feeling of emptiness left in his place. They would probably never see each other again. There was a time where a part of her heart suffered from that fact, but as time passed the pain of that wound slowly began to fade away. Now, the satisfaction of just having a bag of jerky in her arms was enough to hold off that feeling of longing. That's very much like you. It was funny, thinking of what Glock's expression might be if he saw what she was up to now. Though what was lost, was lost. She has had enough experience to know that trying to get it back would just be a waste of energy. All she had to do now was stare up at the starry sky and be lucky enough to enjoy her time. There wasn't much else to do, either. The lessons in class were too easy. She could memorize the contents of a book just by quickly skimming through it. Practical class also required no more than a flick of her finger. The Glock Scholarship Foundation was fully taking care of her tuition, and the professors didn't particularly bother her. One day, she remembered his wrinkly old hands that used to pat Lucy on top of her head. At some point in time, the feeling of missing Glock had become as natural as the first time she had felt comfortable with him. For Lucy, the feeling of leaning on someone and beginning to miss them had come so naturally. Even though it was annoying and frustrating, she was someone who would one day feel suddenly empty, realizing that there was no one around her. After realizing what longing truly was, she didn't want to make any more relationships of that type. It was a feeling that the young genius magician never wanted to experience again. Thus, she had become detached from the world, and by the time she came back to her senses she had already become extremely lazy. In a way, she was living quite a ridiculous life. She knew well that, when the day came that her fate caught up to her, she would still have to get up even if it was annoying. However, it wasn't yet that time. Lucy swung her feet off the dangerous handrails on the roof of Trix Hall. Just in case her hat flew away, she held it down with one hand, biting a piece of her jerky and looking up at the autumn night sky. It was quite vast and pleasant. For the time being, it seemed as if the autumn skies would stay sunny and clear. At least it wouldn't be pouring down rain. Feeling good about that fact, Lucy started to hum, unusual for her. Act 2's final chapter was starting. As for the other events that took place, I didn't have a choice but to hear about them from Ziggs, Yennecar, and Lortel. I didn't want to get unnecessarily close to everything, but I didn't have that type of freedom. Also, there wasn't really a good excuse or reason for me to get involved with what was going on between the main characters in the first year. As long as I could confirm the fact that the story was progressing smoothly towards the end, without any major issues, there wasn't a problem. However, the situation had changed a bit as it neared the final chapter. That was because a reason for me to get involved had appeared. If there was a magically engineered item production formula that was going to be wasted anyway, I definitely wanted to get my hands on it. That was because there was no better option when it came to creating a solid foundation for my growth. If I got lucky, maybe I'd become stronger at an explosive rate. Good work, young Master Ed. Now there's no longer any issues regarding the camp's food reserve level. It's still a bit lacking if it's going to last me through the winter. It didn't take long to collect food, stocking up the camp's food reserve for now. In the first place, I was already somewhat used to hunting, and after raising my specs it had become a lot easier than I thought to catch wild animals. But you can't overwork yourself. If you want to get 6 hours of sleep on schedule, you should slowly finish up your studies for the day. Also, you didn't eat enough meat or vegetables today, young Master Ed. You need to make sure to make up for it at dinner. Also, you haven't been drinking enough water. Yeah. Mug began to report on each aspect of my daily life, one by one. By that point, it felt like I had a personal secretary instead of a spirit that would enter the battlefield at my side. If you end up fainting again, I will really die. Please make sure to live a long, healthy life for me. I really want to maintain our contract relationship for a very long time, young Master Ed. After fainting that one time, Taken seemed to have scolded Mug heavily on what he was doing, since he was always next to my side. However, it was the same regardless of where you went, the ones at the bottom were always left to take blame. I'm really sorry about that, mug. After all, people that are too nice aren't all that great. Right, Ed. What are you talking about all of a sudden? Today, my friends fought amongst themselves, and I couldn't say a thing to them. After finishing up my daily schedule at school, I returned to camp with Yennecar. It started to become normal for Yennecar to return to the camp with me instead of going to Dex Hall. It was at the point where it didn't feel strange in the slightest. I started to wonder if she was even really sleeping back at Dex Hall. Thinking over how Yennecar must have felt uncomfortable at Dex Hall, it was something that I could understand. After all, I was the one who told her that she could come visit my camp whenever she wanted in the first place. Yennecar came back to my camp, automatically taking out her own mug and making some herbal tea on the table with mine. At first, it was uncomfortable to see her using the spirits to help maintain my camp sometimes, or seeing her roll up her uniform sleeves to do my laundry. That was because, from my point of view, I had nothing to repay her with. She even took the time to teach me about spirit-type magic. When I asked her how I could repay her, since I didn't have anything, she had quickly waved her arms and said that it was okay. I even started to have bad thoughts, wondering if that was how a pimp felt. Alright, let's stop thinking such bad thoughts. Clara and Anis had a fight today. You know them, right? The two friends that I am always hanging out with. Yeah, I know them. It wasn't a big deal. We were all just chatting while walking to Monster Ecology from Elemental Studies, when they suddenly started bickering over something minor, which then turned into a fight. But, since I was in between them, they ended up feeling sorry for me. That must have been confusing for you. That's true, but, I started to feel weird when I thought about how considerate they were of me before they started fighting. Yennecar grabbed her mug as she looked down at the campfire sadly. Come to think of it, it's always been like that. Everyone is always so nice, kind, and considerate towards me, even though they don't have to do it. It's like some obsession that they all have. I wouldn't deny the fact that Yennecar was well known for being a fairy in this world. But it was interesting seeing that others' consideration towards her was only making her tired. No, that wasn't it. Thinking of it as a Yennecar type of reaction, it all started to look natural and make sense. But if I bring it up, they will start to think I'm someone who gets annoyed easily, so I can't say it. I'm afraid they'll end up saying something like, why do you feel uncomfortable when we're only being considerate towards you? That's true to some extent. You can't really be mad at them if they're just being nice and considerate towards you. Ah, Ed, your words are always so blunt. But I can't deny what you're saying, since it is the truth. Looking at Yennecar playing around with her feet with a stupid grin on her face, it definitely seemed that her feelings had changed recently. You know what, I'm going to be bad. I know I tried it several times already, but this time I'm going to do it for real. Saying that, she started going into a peculiar stance. She put both of her hands on her waist as she started to act a bit sassy, like she was saying, I'm bad. Honestly speaking, I had no idea what she was trying to do. Come to think of it, I had a favor to ask you. Okay, what is it? Is it urgent? You can tell me. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. After Yennecar spoke, she held her breath and put her mug down. Thinking about what she should say next, or how to say it, she suddenly began to speak slowly. If it's a request, then maybe I will be able to help, or maybe not, but how about you try saying it first? But I feel really bad having to ask you for help for free. It might be very troublesome, or even dangerous. Though, I think it will all be okay somehow. As I lowered my voice and spoke carefully, the moment Yennecar realized I was serious she changed expressions. There are some items that I have lost, and other ones that I want to find, so there is somewhere I want to go, though, it's somewhere that's a bit dangerous to go alone. Where is it? The underground waterways. There's a big entrance on the outskirts of the teacher district that you can enter from. Really? Is that place really that dangerous? I don't really know, as I haven't been there before, but since you said it was, it must really be dangerous. I had created a plan, to a certain extent. The final chapter of Act 2 began at Trix Hall, then proceeded into the underground waterways, the secret laboratory inside of it, and finally the Tower of Magic Power. While the protagonist Taily began to make his move, I was thinking of grabbing all the production formulas and magic tools in the Soul Library located in the secret laboratory, then heading back out. But it would be inefficient to try and get past the secret laboratory's strict security system and all the guards. Plus, it might affect the timeline, and I wasn't even sure whether it would be possible. Even if it was possible, I didn't want to take on such a difficult job personally. So, the key to the operation had to be changed to following Taily. The plan was, while Taily cleared all the obstacles on his way to the final battle, I would carefully follow behind him and grab only what I needed before running away. The badge of honor was dropped by the student president Varys in Phase 1. That accessory greatly increased magical resistance to all elemental magics. Well, it was going to be quite useful getting through future storylines, so I'd let Taily take care of that one. There wasn't much reason to take any of the magically engineered items dropped by Assistant Professor Cleo during Phase 2. While they might be beneficial in progressing the storyline immediately, in the long run they would just become headaches to deal with. The main focus was during Phase 3, at the secret laboratory. All the replica high-end magic books and the various production formulas were located in the Soul Library. I would also have to collect as many magically engineered items as I could while I was there. Taily's swordmaster's skill seemed to have already improved up to its 5th skill, and I'd heard that he was considered at least within Class B in order to be at the top in terms of swordsmanship. Since Taily's specs didn't seem to be lacking, I could rest easy for a bit. In the first place, the final chapter of Act 2 was a bit complicated and had some unnecessary instances where you would end up with a bad ending. Though, if your specs kept up, the fights were pretty simple. Most of the conditions that led to a bad ending were extremely unique, so there weren't any major issues with that. Though, naturally I shouldn't let my guard down. I would need to make sure to check on that, as well. Since I decided to follow him, I also might end up facing a situation that puts me in a crisis. That was why it would be perfect if I was accompanied by a colleague who could lend me their fighting power. As for a person who was both kind towards me and willing to lend me their fighting power to support me, in my small group of acquaintances, that person was obvious. While I was walking around over there, I ended up dropping one of my belongings into the underground waterways. That's why I need to go down there and find it. That sounds like it might be a bit difficult, but I'll help you, Ed. Thanks, Yennecar. The underground waterways are very dark and damp. Plus, there are a few spaces that are quite narrow. It'll be better if you wear clothes that can get dirty. Thanks. I'll make sure to make it up to you. Yeah, of course, Ed. But, you said it's dark and narrow. The hand that was holding Yennecar's mug began to shake as she cleared her throat. The mid-ranking spirits that I couldn't see must have been whispering something in her ear, as she was waving her arms in the air like she was trying to get rid of them. Well, there's nothing we can do about that. Yeah, I'll just have to stick right next to you to make sure I don't get lost. Alright, thanks. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Suddenly, after saying that, Yennecar began to clear her throat again as she gripped her hair. It seemed like she was organizing her thoughts. As expected, I'm too easy. Is that so? But, if I don't come along, you're going to go by yourself, right? You would just run around in that dark place, trying to find it all by yourself, right? I can't deny that. Then, that's not right. I couldn't figure out why she was worrying about such useless thoughts, but either way, Yennecar seemed to be contemplating something. She was a girl who lived her entire life like a princess from a fairy tale. Her entire life had always revolved around accepting large amounts of kindness from others and repaying it back with her own love. You couldn't really call that a bad thing or blame her for being a person without a sense of reality. Yennecar's nature wasn't inherently a terrible thing, and it also wasn't like she was a person that lived while disconnected from reality. Rather, Lucy seemed to stand out more in that regard. All she was doing was happily living her life in a flower garden filled with goodwill. There was no one who could blame her for that. However, if Yennecar was the one who said that she wants to escape that fairy tale life and enter reality, she would have a lot of responsibilities to take on. Sometimes, there would be moments where she would have to turn down someone's favor, or the inevitable moments where she would have to shake her head and decline someone's sincere request. If someone who was as good-natured as Yennecar wanted to achieve that inner growth, a reasonable opportunity needed to present itself. No matter how nice a person might be, if their life became too difficult, there would come many instances where they would accept others' honest goodwill with suspicion and an ill heart. For an innocent girl, who had come straight out of a fairy tale, to become a full-grown adult, she would need to go through a difficult and desperate moment. But it didn't seem like that moment was going to happen. All I can tell her was to cheer up. Well, let's go together when the school schedule is a little more relaxed. Maybe we will get some free time while the school is busy with something else. Maybe it would be perfect if we went during the seal's resonance transferal. The news about the sage's seal was being publicized to some extent. Of course, it wasn't something that the school was proud of, so the rumor only circulated lightly inside the school. Although it was rumored to be more of a mortgage-type transaction than a full-on sale, there was actually no doubt that it was the sale of the school's heart for money. Either way, Yennecar knew enough about the general situation for me to say that. Sure, Ed. I'll be at the entrance of the underground waterways then. Oh wow, it's already gotten this late. After school ended for the day and we returned to the camp together, I finished making some bricks down by the stream and prepared some firewood while Yennecar was cleaning the inside of the cabin and preparing dinner. Before we knew it, the sky had turned dark, and 1 or 2 stars began to appear. Today is the student meeting back at Dex Hall, so I should hurry and head out. I hope you have a good night, Ed. Alright, Yennecar. Take care of yourself and watch your step as it gets darker. Anyway, Yennecar had a knack for making the people around her have a gentler and calmer attitude. In a way, it's rather ironic that she wasn't proud of it, despite being blessed with that nature. She laughed as she waved her hand at me, slowly walking away. I sat down alone by the fire, carving my arrows. Next semester, the number of students in Class A will increase. 2 other students will be promoted. In just 1 year, 2 more students have gone up. This year's class definitely has a lot of talented individuals. Gathering students from the magic department, Professor Glast was in charge of the Class A that he had put together. There was no specific course name, though Professor Glast's special class, which taught all aspects of magic, was only available to a few select students. Currently, only 3 first-year students were allowed to attend the class. Ziggs, Lortel, and Lucy. Class B's Adele and Class C's Ayla are the most likely. Even joining the class halfway through, it won't affect the class's lessons, so there is no reason to worry. The special classrooms located in the teacher district for Class A were spacious. However, there were only 3 students that were seated in that large lecture hall. There was one honest and hard-working boy sitting down and listening to Glast, while another girl was trying to read through Glast's inventions with an underlying smile. The last girl was in a deep sleep. There was no need to say who was who. Oh my, it's Adele and Ayla. I guess those 2 didn't actually have poor and uncertain talent when it comes to magic or their combat abilities. Although Lortel dared to try and provoke the senior professor, Professor Glast showed no particular sign of displeasure. He would always treat those with talent with a larger amount of generosity and tolerance. You could say that, in that sense, his attitude was rather consistent. They were not simply selected because of their amount of magic power or their level of magic power resonance. As long as they are individuals with some type of talent in magic, they will be admitted to Class A. The school had complete trust in Professor Glast's screening process. That meant that he had some level of freedom guaranteed to him when it came to picking students for his class. In return for that trust, Professor Glast's eyes were always able to accurately distinguish those with talent. Always playing musical instruments or singing, Adele always had a relaxed smile, making her famous amongst the students as a wandering minstrel or romanticist. Her strange talent, which let her use magic to play an instrument, was quite interesting even to Lortel. Ayla was less impressive when it came to her amount of magic power and her weak sense of resonance. However, her knowledge and academic ability were comparable to even the professors. In addition, Lortel had overheard before that she seemed to show an abnormal resonance to a unique magic power, instead of just regular magic power. Though, since it was outside of Lortel's interest, she didn't know many details. But wouldn't there be complaints brought up amongst the other students who want to join Class A? That is something that I will need to take care of. There were lots of students that were full of complaints against Professor Glast's class. I'm sorry to say this, but there were also a few other students whose magic power and resonance level didn't seem all that bad, so, if those students end up complaining, I don't want to waste any of my time on those with uncertain talents. Professor Glast responded sharply to Zig's comment. However, Ziggs continued to speak with a displeased expression on his face. I'm saying this as carefully as possible to avoid being rude, but there's no need to be careful with your words. Tell me exactly what you are feeling as it is. It won't hurt me in the slightest. Even though Ziggs stuttered over his words a bit, he got his message across clearly. You mentioned those with uncertain talents, but there are also people who are trying their hardest in a desire to be recognized. You don't know what ways they may or may not be able to improve, but I'm sure their skills won't be low. That's why, when it seems like you are ignoring them because of their lackluster skills, it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. It seems like you are unfairly demeaning their efforts. As Ziggs continued to speak, he briefly looked up at Professor Glast's expression. Sitting down a few seats next to him, Lortel let out a sigh. Staring at Ziggs, she looked like she really couldn't understand him at all. Ziggs seemed to think the act of directly questioning Professor Glast's policy was disrespectful. He still really hadn't figured out just what type of person Professor Glast was. Even though it was a situation where it wouldn't be all that strange to get mad, Professor Glast continued to calmly respond in a rather subdued tone. Did you think that by demeaning and despising their efforts, I was looking down and ruining those kids' lives? Ziggs Eifelstein. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Silence suggested that it was true. I apologize for that. I don't particularly think that way. Rather, the surest way to ruin their life would be to hastily instill a sense of confidence in their uncertain talent by pushing them forward. Lortel stopped listening to what he was saying. To someone like Lortel, who had gathered information regarding the personal histories of the academic staff, Professor Glast's remarks held a different meaning. Professor Glast's only daughter Mayuri was a former student of the magic department at Sylvania and died after hastily participating in a monster subjugation. Just like a beetle is a beauty in the eyes of its mother, Professor Glast had expectations of Mayuri as she seemed to have a talent for magic. And because of that sense of overconfidence in that uncertain talent of hers, there was no need to explain the details of what had happened when she jumped into participating in the monster subjugation. His excessive obsession with proven talents and respect towards the man that brought forth the age of progress. The reason that he was more passionate than anyone else for the birth of someone extraordinary, someone who could make the majority of those without talent follow behind them, was probably to ultimately eliminate such unnecessary sacrifice. To some it might seem like a noble action, while to others it might be seen as extremely pitiful. Lortel didn't want to give any sympathy to him because, in this sense, it was purely self-righteousness. I understand. Ziggs quietly lowered his eyes as he nodded. Digging any deeper than that would just be considered nosy. And Lortel Cahaland, there's something I need to discuss with you that isn't related to this class. I will call on you later. It must be because there was something he needed to discuss regarding the Sage's Seal resonance transferal. Lortel was the person who had bought the Sage's Seal, and Professor Glast was the one who was left responsible for the Seal's resonance transferal by the school. It was a matter that took place aside from their relationship as a teacher and student, so it wasn't something he could currently discuss at the podium. Magic skills details. Grade: Proficient Magician. Specialized field: Elements. Common Magic. Fast Casting Level 8. Mana Sense Level 8. Fire Element Magic. Ignite Level 14. Wind Element Magic. Wind Blade Level 13. Less than Intermediate Magic can now be learned. Greater than. Spirit Type Magic. Spirit Resonance Level 12. Spirit Understanding Level 12. Spirit Manifestation Level 1. Sense Sharing Level 1. Less than Spirit Slot. Low-ranking Fire Spirit Mug greater than. Resonance Level 2. Spiritual Efficiency, Good. Unique Skills. Blessing of Fire Fortune Temporary Immunity to Fire. Explosion, low-level explosion. Increased ability of fire-type magic. Less than new spirit slot, empty greater than. It was about time to start learning intermediate magic. For students in the magic department, whether or not you could acquire mid-level magic was extremely important. The level of mid-level magic, also known as intermediate magic, was the boundary between an expert magician and a rudimentary one. Unless you were originally born with a talent for magic, you would usually start dealing with intermediate magic during the second year's curriculum or at the start of your third year. Even if you were only able to use 2 or 3 mid-level spells, it would be enough for you to be treated as a professional magician. In other words, a magician's ability was judged by how diverse and powerful their mid-level magic was. Only about 10% of Sylvania graduates were able to reach that level or beyond. Even with the same mid-level magic, the power it had was certainly different depending on the individual level or proficiency. For example, even though Lortel's ice spear was mid-level magic, it certainly exceeded the power of the other mid-level magic used by the second years. As for high-level magic, unless you were at a level higher than the faculty, you would only be able to use it partially. Even among the graduating fourth years, only students that were considered elite held a command over it. And if you were looking at the highest level of magic, in the first place, within Sylvania, even counting the professors, there were only 1 or 2 people who would be able to command it, except for unusual cases, like Lucy. Anyway, my specs had risen to the extent that there shouldn't have been any problems with using mid-level magic. Considering where I started, I'd grown so much that I had forgotten how weak I used to be. By the next elemental studies class, I would be able to partially fulfill my role as a real magician. Feeling satisfied by my progress, I closed my book where I was sitting in the corner of the classroom. Today's elemental studies class went rather deep. And there were many things for me to learn. Ed, you have been called upon. After your next lecture ends, please go down to Professor Glast's laboratory, which is underneath the school's conference rooms in the teacher district. It was when I was gathering my books about to leave the classroom that I heard the voice. It was the elemental studies teaching assistant, who I was already quite familiar with. Are you saying I've been summoned? Come to think of it, I didn't respond to Professor Glast's summons last time. It was because I ended up collapsing after overworking myself. I had forgotten about it, but because he called on me again, it seemed like it was important business. As far as I knew, Professor Glast shouldn't have been able to meet with anyone at the moment. The seal's resonance transferal was in a few days, so he should be neck-deep in work. Of course, I was also busy. I still had to finish the work back at camp, prepare for final exams, and there were a few things I needed to check on regarding the storyline, so I didn't have much time to spare. I wanted to take care of my business slowly, as I didn't want to end up pushing my body too far. Though, I wondered if I was going to start getting busy again soon. All right. Tell him I got his message. That was what I told the teaching assistant as I finished gathering my books. Chapter 53. Glast Subjugation 2. This concludes my magic notes, regarding my experiences while visiting the southern continent. After looking around the world, there were many truths about magic that I had yet to realize. My title of Archmage is nothing but an embarrassment. As expected, the study of magic is as wide and deep as the ocean. It's also become difficult for me to draw an outline of it all with these blurry old eyes of mine. I'm reminded of Sylvania's belief, to not hastily infer the depths of learning. It seems that this book will most likely be the last one that I write. It's a shame that time keeps passing by. Back in the day, my hands were strong enough to break even steel, but now there are wrinkles between each of these fingers of mine. I'm sure that if the great sage Sylvania, who was the greatest teacher and an idol to all scholars, saw me now, she would burst out laughing. Sylvania, who died at a young age, is still a beautiful woman in my memory. Because of her death, I decided to dedicate my life towards academics. Looking back on my life, it seemed to pass by in an instant. It did not seem all that great at the time, but now that I am in my final years, I see that my life was actually quite eventful. The sadness that ate at my heart the day my teacher died has now become nothing more than an old memory. Still, when living a long life, it's inevitable that you must occasionally face a sense of longing. As I watch over the starlight at dawn, or the slowly setting sun on the horizon, such emotions suddenly fill me without any warning. Longing is ultimately accompanied by a bitter loneliness. Sadness that comes from losing someone will sometimes even hinder your reason. There are certainly times when suddenly I am faced with the desire to break the providence and twist the truth of this world just to see Sylvania's face once more. However, those who are lost, and those who have lost must become stronger. Sadly, that is the case in life. And that is why you must be strong. I dedicate the last sentence of this book to you, who has been the period to the end of my life. Lucy. Magic notes about his experiences when visiting the southern continent, written by Glocked. Excerpt. There are times when a bad hunch occurs to you for no reason at all. When that happens, you need to organize your thoughts carefully. When your gut feeling starts to cry out, there is always a good reason for it. And my present situation was a perfect example of it. Why are you here? The girl who entered the empty laboratory, with its door open, was someone I was very familiar with. Her short, wavy brown hair that fell into that innocent face of hers was one that I was extremely familiar with. In the first place, if you played Sylvania's failed swordmaster, she was someone that you could never forget. The girl who always remained by the protagonist Taylor's side, supporting him as they grew together. One of the most important main characters in the storyline. No matter what you did or what route you took, she was a character whose presence could never be lost. The main heroine. The moment I ended up confronting Ayla Triss in the teacher district's conference room, all sorts of thoughts flooded my mind. Why were you waiting here for me? Don't come any closer to me. Heek. As for me, since I had been called upon by Professor Glast, I went to his personal research lab. However, since there wasn't a single seat, I decided to sit on the sofa in the waiting room instead. Ayla thinking that I was waiting for her was just a misunderstanding. I just sat completely still on the sofa as I turned my eyes towards Ayla, who shuddered and ran away towards a wall in a corner of the laboratory by herself. Quote. She reacted like she had come across a suspicious person. I wasn't really doing anything, so wasn't the way she was treating me a bit much? Well, even though I felt that my reputation amongst the students had gotten better recently, there was no way Ayla was ever going to show a favorable attitude towards me. The most fundamental reason that she despised me so much was because of the incident at the entrance examination. As it happened over 10 months ago, she might have lessened her anger to some extent, but, well, it wasn't like I hadn't run into her in the meantime. Above all else, I was the one who kept persistently attacking Ayla, who was weak in terms of practical fighting power, back during the occupation of Ophelis Hall. Even though it was terrible of me, I had used her as their weakness, shooting her with my arrow. I couldn't really tell her that I had made it weaker by wrapping the arrow beforehand. Either way, from Ayla's point of view, there was no way she would ever look at me favorably. Well, her attitude wasn't the reason that my mind filled with such thoughts. It was because of the timing. The resonance transferal of the seal was just around the corner. It was likely an event to signal the start of Act 2's final chapter. By the time the resonance transfer took place, Ayla would already be subdued by Glast. I searched through my memories. Before and after the event, just what was Ayla up to? Of course, it was extremely difficult to try and search back for such a specific moment, but I was able to clearly recall a scene of her, right around the resonance transfer. In the main lobby of Trix Hall, the center of the school's administration, the resonance transferal of the Sage's seal was taking place. While representatives of both the school and the company sat down together, the seal was to be removed by Professor Glast. The current resonance owner, Headmaster Obel, would release his authority over it, then leave the stage to allow Lortel to take ownership. Shortly after, an explosion would go off. All of the pre-engraved magic circles around Trix Hall and the seal's display shelf would activate after being triggered by magic power, throwing the lobby into chaos. In the meantime, Glast would steal the seal that no one currently had authority over as he ran to Ayla, who he had subdued with his time prison magic, back in his Trix Hall personal laboratory. He would then escape into the underground waterways. Hey, after thinking back on it, I had a minor question regarding Ayla and her actions. By the time the seal's resonance transferal took place, Ayla was already supposed to be subdued by Professor Glast and trapped in his personal laboratory back at Trix Hall. "Why are you here?" Professor Glast called on me. "Never mind, it's none of your business." I started to think that my ominous gut feeling was starting to become a reality, little by little. My brain started spiraling. It was almost time for the meeting. That means that Professor Glast would soon return to his personal laboratory. As I strained on my ears, I could hear weak footsteps coming from the end of the hallway. It was highly likely that they were coming from Professor Glast, who had completed his work at school. It wouldn't be a good idea to run down that hallway, as there was a high chance I would run into him one-on-one. Down the hallway of the secluded laboratory, there wouldn't be any witnesses, either. I quickly stood up from my seat as I strode up to Ayla, who was by the entrance. I pulled out the dagger wrapped around my thigh as Ayla flinched in surprise. "Hyog. What are you doing?" I didn't care about her reaction. I stuck the knife into the edge of the entrance's wall and turned around, looking at the empty laboratory. Professor Glast's private laboratory, which was more than 142 square feet, was full of piles of books and documents. All sorts of school administrative documents, academic books, personal research journals, entry-level magic books, and more were piled up, filling the entirety of the spacious lab. I quickly glanced over each cabinet, one by one, as well as the documents that piled up on his desk. I quickly flipped through the pages of the personal journal that I found in one of the drawers, quickly reading the notes and memos he'd written down. Most of the content was things I had already known about, so I could read through it quickly. I had already figured out about 90% of the situation already. It was no more than a habit of mine to check if there was even a chance that the future I knew of could have possibly changed. Nevertheless, there seemed to be no significant variables that would have changed anything. Just why in the world did Professor Glast call me personally to his personal laboratory? I decided that figuring out the reason was urgent, but no matter how much I looked, it seemed as if the storyline was still following the original timeline properly. At that rate of progression, without any changes, it wasn't hard to picture the final scene, where Glast was defeated by Taylor. However, if there was a small mix-up in the timeline, I would definitely need to check and fix it. Considering the circumstances, after quickly spinning the gears in my head to figure out what was going on, it seemed that Professor Glast had called Ayla to his personal laboratory to kidnap her. That wasn't all that difficult to predict. Because there wasn't much time left before the seal's resonance transferal, he would need to start taking action soon. The question was, why did he also call me there? Very dimly, my gut feeling started speaking to me. I wasn't particularly safe, either. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of Professor Glast's footsteps started to creep closer as he approached the laboratory across the hallway. Help me. All I did was pull out a dagger and approach her. Was it really all that scary? But as I thought about it, I had to change my mind as I realized that it must have been plenty scary for her. I was sorry for that, but I was in quite a hurry, too. I poked around Professor Glast's desk quickly, opening all the drawers. I unfolded all the documents that I could find, reading through them quickly before throwing them down. Then I opened all the magic books, trying to determine what each of them was about. Opening the cabinets as the contents fell out, I went through all the folders that were finished being handled, all while quickly going through all the official documents he had stored. Most of the information I found were things I already knew, unimportant, or not related to the incident at all. As I searched through the papers like a thief looking for valuables, I found a file in the corner of a filing cabinet. Record of investigation into the occupation of Ophelis Hall and the current status of investigation. Unfolding the documents, underneath there was a large crystal ball. Among them, there were traces of their investigation into what I had done at Ophelis Hall. None of this was Professor Glast's work. Looking at who from the school was in charge of handling this document, there was a name that I recognized. I heard that the assistant professor Cleo entered the Northern Forest yesterday. Did you see her, Ed? Suddenly, the piece of information that Yennecar had given me popped into my memory, its importance suddenly clear. Looking at the crystal ball laying among the documents, it was definitely the thoughtography crystal ball at the school. used. Even though the magic power that was infused into it didn't reveal anything, it wasn't difficult for me to infer just what scene the crystal ball had captured. At that moment, I realized I had to figure out just how things were turning out quickly. Thud. Professor Glast opened the door, entering the room. He was dressed in a neat faculty uniform, wearing a white magician's robe. His skinny body and hair, which stuck out and looked rather fussy, were the same as usual. Professor Glast. Ayla, who was startled, quickly got up. She quickly hid behind Professor Glast as her body trembled in fear. Help me, please. That guy is holding a dagger. Heeg. Wog. Magic power began to fill the entire laboratory. Professor Glast's collar began to float as if he were in outer space, and for a brief instant my body was hit with an immense pressure. Hyog. Professor Glast had reached his hand out to Ayla, who had fallen. Unlike ordinary mana, which was a clear color by nature, the magic power that celestial magic used had more of a reddish color to it. A sense of magic power, as thick as mud, began to envelop Ayla. Shortly after, the celestial magic power began to restrain the unconscious girl. The celestial magic, time prison. Once she was subdued by time prison, she hardened like stone, completely stuck in place. Interestingly, until the magic ended, she would not be able to be affected from the outside in any way. Pushing, scratching, hitting her with a stone, or cutting her with a knife. It wouldn't have any effect on Ayla. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Professor Glast's expression didn't change in the slightest. As if he was just taking care of his business as usual, he reached out towards me without even declaring that I was next. Dark red magic power began to rise from Professor Glast's body, heading in my direction immediately. Mug. It took less than a second to make a decision. The elemental magic, explosion, that was imprinted in the dagger that I had stuck into the wall by the entrance activated itself. By nature, explosion was also accompanied by quite a long casting time. By imbuing it with the elemental spell beforehand, I was able to omit the entire process, producing only the result. Boom. Caught up in the unexpected explosion, Professor Glast disappeared into the smoke. I confirmed that he was taking a defensive stance just before he disappeared. He wouldn't have been defeated just by that one attack. In the first place, right at the start of the explosion he had instantly cast noise suppression magic to keep the disruption from getting any bigger. It was an incredible show of reflexes and agility, to the point it gave me goosebumps. Either way, the entrance near that side was blocked, so I couldn't move hastily. I quickly jumped over to the side, pushing myself underneath Professor Glast's desk. Time prison didn't work unless you directly touched the celestial magic power. Basically, that dark red mana was really difficult to handle, so if you lost focus even a little it would fade away. As long as I was able to avoid it, I shouldn't get hurt by it. You're rather quick at figuring out the situation, Ed Roths-Taylor. Your actions are extremely smooth. In the rising smoke, the light in his eyes started to shine. In that short period of time, did you really manage to go through all my research papers and academic paperwork? He seemed to think that I had found out about his true intentions after reading through all of his documents. There wasn't any reason for me to do that in the first place. I already knew from the very beginning just what course of action Professor Glast was planning to take. However, I didn't expect to get caught up in it. I can tell that you were anticipating and preparing for my attack just from your movements and the way you are currently handling the situation. But it's strange. There's no way you should have been able to figure out my true intentions just by going through all these documents. Professor Glast, is there really a need for you to subdue me? With the desk between us, I started to cast Ignite on the tip of my finger. Before Professor Glast arrived in the laboratory, I gathered all the papers together and piled them up near his desk. At that point, there was no way to determine what was important and what was not. But if I were to burn the entire stack of papers, it would certainly cause a problem. Actually, losing just a few of those papers wasn't that big a deal. If I burned a few of his papers, it wasn't like the entire plan would fall apart immediately. However, I was almost certain that it would set things back. The resonance transferal was that day and the next, so it would be a disaster if things were to go wrong. Because of that, I could use those documents as a hostage, to some extent, anyway. Of course, it was a very weak attempt. If I were to make a mistake, I would just end up sacrificing all of those documents and he would subdue me. However, Professor Glast would want to subdue me quietly using celestial magic, trying to avoid as much damage to the documents as possible. Taking advantage of any cracks in his thought process, if there was even the slightest bit of hesitation, an opportunity for negotiations would present itself. Professor Glast: this is just a groundless guess, but the reason you need Ayla, is it because she has an unusual resonance with celestial magic? If that's the case, you have already subdued her, so you've achieved your goal. There should be no reason for you to subdue me as well. My lips are sealed, so you won't have to worry about that. If that were the case, I wouldn't have called you to my laboratory, would I? As long as he had Ayla, wouldn't everything go according to plan? I couldn't understand why he would want to go as far as to call me out and subdue me. There's a reason to have you here. Because of that reason, I hope you don't think too badly of me. Making such vague statements, wasn't that too much? Couldn't he just explain? Well, to be fair, he didn't even say a single word when he had subdued Ayla. Maybe it was obvious that he would treat me the same way. At the rate things were going, if I were subdued, I'd be dragged to Professor Glast's secret laboratory with Ayla. A laboratory that was located in the middle of Trix Hall. It wouldn't be good if things got any bigger, so he was going to try and subdue me with as little magic as possible to avoid attention. With that being the case, I tried to think of a way to beat Professor Glast and escape from Trix Hall. Though, while thinking of just breaking through the wall altogether, a new possibility suddenly came to my mind. Wouldn't it just be okay to get kidnapped? That was the sort of reverse thinking I came up with. Because time prison ate up a lot of magic power, there was clearly a time limit. If he were to subdue the two of us, then he would run out of magic power within just a few days. Just like the original timeline, he'd steal the Sage's seal and lock me and Ayla down in his secret laboratory. Then, he would eventually release us from the time prison. Even if things didn't work out, Taylor's party would eventually storm down into his secret laboratory and make a scene. At that time, wouldn't it be best to just grab the things I needed and run away? The secret laboratory's layout was something I knew so well, I was completely sick of it. I didn't have to get a headache dealing with the waterways and secretly following the subjugation team or making Yennecar go through a hard time unnecessarily. Taylor's specs were also more than high enough. Plus, the other members of the subjugation team were not weak by any means. Then, should I just get kidnapped? My mind started to spin again. Even if I succeeded in escaping, Professor Glast wouldn't just stand still and do nothing about it. Rather, it was more likely that the schedule for the resonance transferal would be disrupted because Professor Glast would be trying to subdue me after I saw his true colors. On the other hand, deliberately getting kidnapped was also risky. If things started to go wrong and the storyline went awry during my absence, there would be no one who could take measures against it. I'd been thoroughly checking the flow of the story, to the point that I wondered if I really needed to go that far, but it was impossible to really know when or how something else would get tangled up. I had no choice but to weigh each option, determining which one has the bigger risk, eventually choosing what I will do. It would be great if you didn't resist futilely. Since I don't have time to give a long explanation, I'll have to skip over it. Trust me, it won't be all that bad a story for you either, Ed Roths-Taylor. I carefully came out of hiding, stepping away from the desk and looking directly at Professor Glast. Oh, did you want to stand against me? Or did you come up with some sort of plan? Facing Professor Glast, I stood still with my eyes wide. The magic power began to rise as he fired it towards me. With Professor Glast's telekinesis magic, he returned all sorts of documents and magic books back to their original spots. In his personal laboratory, which had been cleaned up to some extent, there were two people who had been completely hardened. One was the form of Ayla, who was rolling on the floor with a face of terror. The other was the form of Ed, who was standing up straight and taking Professor Glast's magic head-on, not avoiding it. Professor Glast sat down at his work desk, opening Ed's investigation report once again. Bit by bit, he started to remember the conversation he had with Assistant Professor Cleo, who was in charge of making the report. Magic history, introduction to spiritual studies, elemental studies writing, monster ecology, common magic power studies, principles of resonance analysis, magic studies, introduction to magic engineering, herbology, introduction to magic circles, separate elemental studies. He got nearly perfect scores in all of his writing subjects. That's right. As soon as he entered his second year, his grades all jumped up. His practical classes are still a bit uncertain, but they are still slowly on the rise. His overall magic power is still a bit below average compared to the other second years, but his pace of growth is just ridiculous. Apparently, he even made a contract with a spirit, so it makes sense that he collapsed from overworking. Assistant Professor Cleo spoke excitedly as she tapped the papers. When I first saw the change in his grades, I was quite suspicious. I couldn't believe that he achieved so much in his studies, all while living in the wilds. It's like he's living every day by himself for 48 hours. Really. Assistant Professor Cleo was looking over Ed's transcript, which she had received from the school's headquarters. In the first place, she wasn't in charge of his grades, and the number of students she dealt with daily wasn't small. Because of that, it wasn't possible for her to know of all the developments in his grades. However, after her attention started to focus on Ed, she checked over his personal information. Seeing it, she couldn't help but be completely dumbfounded. Assistant Professor Cleo had a pretty good sense of self-management. She looked like someone with a screw loose, but there was a reason she was a professor even at her young age. Since she was like that, she could clearly see just how ridiculous the amount of effort Ed had been putting into his daily work and lifestyle was. This is the result of really putting in effort, with his life on the line. You should also know this, Professor Glast, but Ed's talent isn't at a level that could be considered outstanding by any means. Before she knew it, Cleo's tone of voice was starting to quiet. Just how much effort did he put in? To the point he was coughing up blood. I can't even guess the amount. Whether or not he's the Black Curtain and the reason you're getting this excited over him are completely different matters, Assistant Professor Cleo. Why yes, that's true. But I just didn't expect his record to be like this. Professor Glast closed the folder and tossed it aside. Laying back in his chair, he quietly stared at Ed, who had been completely frozen by time prison. Even at the moment the ominous magic power hit him, he didn't blink once. His expression also showed no signs of anxiety. It was the moment that he had been hit by Glast's magic that Professor Glast felt a certain confidence instilled in him, rendering him speechless. Until he was excommunicated from the Roths-Taylor family, where he had been treated with all sorts of nobility, he lived a life that even a king would even be jealous of. But less than a year after that fact, his hands were now full of calluses and his body was covered in all sorts of scratches. His body, which used to look rather slender and weak, was now already full of fine muscles. Even from his collar, you could just start to see his muscles taking shape. Also, the sense for combat he had seen through the crystal ball was something that couldn't be easily overlooked. Controlling the battlefield, thoroughly analyzing his opponents, and taking advantage of all available means to win was an ability that one who was born with natural talent and could defeat everyone could never have. It was the way the weak fought. Even if one humbly admitted that they were weaker than their opponent, it was a peak that could only be reached if, and only if, they didn't give up on winning. The mind had to be stronger than the body. What came to mind was someone he had lost. It was a wound that he thought had healed. The memory of seeing his only daughter's back as she went out on her way to assist in the monster subjugation, all to improve her father's name. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Glast, who was sitting completely still and organizing his thoughts, ultimately never noticed what was happening. A small figure, shaped like a bat, popped out from underneath Ed's collar and quickly flew out the door. For Professor Glast, who only had the fundamentals of spiritual resonance, didn't catch that brief moment. There was too much for him to think about. In the first place, the plan was to only kidnap Ayla. However, he ended up having to subdue Ed as well. Still, Ed's social circle wasn't very large, and he had a mixed reputation, so there wouldn't be a big fuss if he were to disappear. At least for a few days, there wouldn't be a problem. It wasn't an issue to the point that it would cause a major setback in his plans. Thinking that, Professor Glast quietly started to relax, ridding himself of his nervousness. Smoke rose from the campfire. The camp was in the northern forest. Over the campfire was a well-made chicken soup, boiling and waiting for someone to taste it. An elementalist girl continued to hum as she stirred the soup. Meanwhile, another magician with a small frame slept, snoring away on the roof of the cabin. The two of them looked natural, as if they were living their daily lives, though the actual owner of the camp was nowhere to be seen. As the examination period approached, there were many things to take care of coming up to the end of the semester. It was only natural that his return home would be delayed. Since he was a person that was always busy, it couldn't be helped. With such thoughts in mind, the elementalist girl stared blankly up at the night sky. As she did so, a burning bat urgently flew through the grass, coming to sit on the girl's shoulder. As it whispered something into her ear in a desperate manner, little by little the girl stopped moving. The wind blew by as the trees in the forest began to shake. The autumn night kept on going on. Chapter 54. Glast Subjugation 3. Ayla, who had gone to meet with Professor Glast, has not returned. Sitting in a corner on the campus grounds, Taylor, who had stuffed a sandwich in his mouth, suddenly tilted his head. The monster ecology course's lessons were rather easy, similar to an elective course. Since it was Ayla, who was already well versed in such subjects, passing the test wouldn't be a problem even if she missed a few classes. However, it was strange that she hadn't been seen at all, given that she had both elemental studies and combat magic classes in the teacher's district. It was Ayla, who had extremely poor proficiency when it came to combat-type skills. There was no way that someone as hardworking as her would miss a class specializing in an area she was weak in. Did she head back to the dorm? His long, two-handed sword, embedded with many jewels, seemed to be perfect in length. The jewels were filled with magic power, which supported the various magics imbued in the sword. Not only that, all of the other accessories he was wearing were also imbued with various smaller effects. He had become rather proficient, even in other secondary support skills. No longer could he be called a failing student wherever he went. He still had a long way to go, but he had managed to complete a decent amount of meaningful training over the past year. Taylor picked up the sword he had put down nearby while eating his meal, turning his body to look around. As his swordmaster's skills increased, his vitality also increased. He wouldn't have a problem with his physical condition, even if he were to push himself a little more after classes. Did some type of important business come up? Taylor kept talking to himself as he started walking away. There were 2 days until the Sage's Seal resonance transferal. It was only a matter of time before Taylor would hear the rumors claiming that Professor Glast had kidnapped 2 students. Without any notice, my eyes suddenly snapped open. I suddenly woke, no trace of the feeling I would normally get after a good night's sleep. In my slightly dazed state, I couldn't focus immediately. Soon after, I remembered the situation I had been in right before I lost consciousness. I held onto my sense of reason. Eek! After quickly recovering my memories and promptly raising my upper body, I heard a strange noise. The first thing that I saw was a ceiling made of stone. Looking down a little lower, there was a smooth wall made of the same material. There was an iron bar set up on one side. Looking around, the immediate image that came to mind was a prison cell. Inside of it, a girl was trapped alongside me. Don't come any closer. The girl crouching in a corner of the prison wall shouted at me with a shaky voice. On one hand, she was taking a defensive position and holding her body close. However, seeing her so full of fear only proved that she didn't have the power to resist. Really, if I were a black-hearted criminal, she definitely would have been the perfect prey. Well, it wasn't a crime to be scared, but it wasn't the smart thing to do. Ayla Triss, right. I tried to suppress my growing headache as I used my hands to wipe across my face. I stood up from my seat, taking in the scene once more and checking to see what was outside of the bars. I thought I knew the reason that Ayla was so terrified. Looking through the bars in the room across from ours, there was a monster being kept in the prison. Its lower body appeared to be that of a lion's or a tiger's, but its upper body was on the large side, even compared to other monsters. Looking somewhat like a rugged ogre, with feathers protruding from its forearms, half a demon's wing on one side of its back, and a bluish discharge trickling out of its severed ear. Not only did it have 2 arms, but there were all sorts of arms protruding from its waist and its back. Since it was asleep, it didn't appear hostile. However, its looks were enough to make your breath catch from nerves just by looking at it. It was Act 2, Chapter 7's Devil of the Underground Waterways. Professor Glast's research team was holding it to study it and further research on monsters. Ayla had been called to a professor's laboratory, only to be attacked suddenly and fall unconscious. Then, once she'd woken up, she had come face to face with a sleeping monster. Not to mention, she was in the same room with the unconscious fallen aristocrat that was an enemy of hers. I could understand Ayla's dramatic reaction. "I see you've regained consciousness, Ed Roth's tailor." On the other side of the bars, a man that appeared to be the caretaker came into view. "I'm sorry about the poor treatment you're receiving despite being a precious student." His face was full of wrinkles. He was wearing a mask to hide the burn scars that he had received while researching elemental studies. Right on the edge of the mask, I could see a bit of the scar that certainly caught my eye. His bent spine, small stature, patchy hair, it all showed the passage of time and stress, making him look like a scruffy old man. Either way, he was the most well-rounded of all Professor Glast's colleagues and followers. Coombe, a researcher of celestial studies. In the final chapter of Act 2, Professor Glast's laboratory phase, he played the role of the final boss. He was an enemy with quite a tricky pattern, but if you avoided his attacks and bought time, the celestial magic power would eventually eat away at him until he self-destructed. After that, the devil of the underground waterways would escape from the laboratory once more, buying Professor Glast some time to escape. I'm not sure what Professor Glast is thinking, but I have been instructed to take care of you thoroughly, as you are both necessary talents. Is that so? You're calmer than I thought you would be. Opening my eyes to find myself in Professor Glast's secret laboratory, that was something I had already predicted would unfold, even before I had fallen unconscious. It was something that was supposed to happen, so there wasn't a reason for me to be taken aback by it. I thought you would jump at me and cause a ruckus like Ayla. You're quick to understand what I say, more than I had expected. From what he was saying, it appeared that Ayla had started screaming to be let go as soon as she'd come to her senses. As he turned his head and looked towards Ayla, she flinched and took on a rather pathetic defensive stance once more. As for me, I didn't have the slightest intention to do anything of the sort. My paranoia over getting seriously hurt was a disease. Well, Professor Glast must have a reason for all of this. When I responded with such a simple answer, both Ayla and Coombe tilted their heads in confusion. No matter how much confidence I might have in Professor Glast's academic achievements and abilities, it wasn't normal for me to say such a thing after being subdued and kidnapped without a single explanation. I didn't particularly believe in Professor Glast as in the first place. Being a character that would meet his fall at the end of the storyline anyway, I really couldn't. Anyway, I'll be at the end of this corridor looking over some research data while I monitor everything, so don't worry too much. After saying that, Coombe walked towards the end of the hallway. Sticking my head out, I looked down the hallway and, as expected, it had the exact same layout as the game. If you went across the hallway, you would probably find the monster research room. It was pretty much the central location here in Professor Glast's secret laboratory. I still couldn't believe I was able to go deep into that place without any risks. The route I needed to take had been shortened quite a bit. There was nothing else I had to do. All I needed to do was sit around and wait. Everything would be fine. While I sat there and waited mindlessly, Taylor would eventually show up with his subjugation team to save the kidnapped Ayla. They would make a complete wreck of the laboratory. During that moment, I would take the opportunity to escape, and head straight to the Soul Library. To get all the way down to the monster research room, they would have to go through the Soul Library and defeat the librarian. Once Taylor arrived, the library would have already been fully cleared. No matter what I ended up doing, there wouldn't be any magic books or bookshelves with souls in them to interfere, as they would have already been subdued. Also, there wouldn't be any angry soul librarians as I wandered the library. With the area completely free of those that would get in my way, I could run around and finish my plans, gathering all the various magic book replicas and magic engineering production formulas that I wanted. And what would I have to do during that time? What will I have to take care of? Absolutely nothing. The idea of reaping so many benefits without putting in any of the work was starting to make my conscience hurt. Eek, eek. Well, it was a bit mentally exhausting being in the same space as Ayla while she trembled in fear. Professor Glast really made a poor choice. Why kidnap Ayla, of all people? That woman was just a ticking time bomb, one that was heavily favored by the main characters of the world. Since he picked the wrong person, he should at least be prepared to have his laboratory completely destroyed. Even as I said that, I do feel a little sorry for Professor Glast. He didn't have the luxury of knowing the full situation. If you take even one step closer, I'll scream. I'll bite my tongue, so don't come any closer. I'm serious. Do I look like I'm lying? If I fight back with all my might, even you won't be able to walk away unscathed. So don't move an inch. I wasn't moving. I didn't say a word, and I really don't care whether she bit her tongue or not. I was just blankly staring into the air, trying to organize my thoughts as Ayla's legs suddenly fell asleep and she started spewing out sharp words at me. When I glared at her, she gathered some weak magic power and created a low-grade defense. Her beginner elemental magic proficiency had improved somewhat, but not enough to keep up with her grade. With a defense as weak as that, I would be able to shatter it even casting a quick and half-assed wind blade. Though, considering that her body was still trembling in fear, she did put up the best defense that she could. After everything that had happened, I didn't think it would be of use to tell her that I didn't have any hostility towards her. If I had to decide how I felt towards Ayla, it would have to be more friendly or kindly. I had already played Sylvania's failed swordmaster several times. Within every route, at any point in time or in any situation, I was able to witness her honesty and sincerity as she stood next to the protagonist time and time again. It was quite commendable, so I viewed her highly. Why would I ever think of her with hatred or hostility? Given the situation, and what Ayla thought of me, it couldn't be helped that she would stay away from me like that, but still, it wouldn't be bad to at least say everything that I have to say to her either way. I'm not going to attack you, so you don't have to overreact. I decided to only speak facts. I don't have any ill feelings towards you. What did you say? Sitting in a corner of the prison cell, I sighed deeply as I stared up at the ceiling. Ayla still hadn't relaxed at all, despite my totally disinterested behavior towards her. For a long time, she kept staring at me as she breathed heavily. Then she slowly lowered her arm, though she still had that anxious expression on her face. As the magic power flowing along her arm stopped, the defense she had been keeping up gradually faded. It didn't mean much in the first place since Ayla's level of magic power meant that she wouldn't have been able to keep that defense up for an extended period of time anyway. You're lying. If I did want to harass you for some reason, would it make any sense for me to waste this golden opportunity? Don't you agree? In a place where no one could get away, where our vast difference in strength meant that Ayla couldn't fight back. Ayla must have been completely horrified, trembling in fear because she recognized that fact. Stop wasting your strength saying stupid things and just sit still, Ayla. I spoke to Ayla with a confident tone to my voice. As long as you wait, Taylor will eventually come to save you. Taylor, do you even have the right to say his name? And what if I don't? Well, I am sorry about what happened at the entrance exam, but there was a reason I had to do that back then. There's also the fact that he helped tremendously during the Glaskin incident. You're sorry. Ayla glanced down at me with her eyes full of confusion, staring at me again. Saying that you're sorry, did you just apologize? Right now, are you really Ed Roth's Taylor? Are you suspicious of me just because I apologized? Seriously, why can't you just trust me? That wouldn't have been a strange reaction if I were the same Ed from before I entered his body, but it had already been a year since then. At that point, she needed to calm down and accept it already. Whether the character Ed had changed, gone crazy after being excommunicated, or he was like that from the beginning, just accept one of those reasons as fact and realize that I no longer had the desire to pick a fight with her like before. As long as the main storyline didn't get twisted, I didn't really care what she did. None of that was of interest to me. Even if you don't believe in me, you can believe in Taylor, right? I'm sure he'll come and rescue you. He'll find out that you've been kidnapped and he'll somehow figure out his way down to this secret laboratory, destroying everything in his path as he comes to get you out of here. So don't be scared for no reason at all. Just trust in him while you wait. Changing my strategy, I started mentioning Taylor's name a lot more as her expression relaxed a bit. Nevertheless, that defensive stance of hers didn't change one bit. Sitting in a corner and trembling like a little puppy in front of a wild beast, seeing that, I felt sorry for her instead of angry. I believe in Taylor. All right. That's great. But I don't want Taylor to come to my rescue. What nonsense was she talking about now? Ayla continued with her story with her face buried in her knees. I'm nothing more than a useless lump of baggage for him. Taylor has gone through all sorts of hardships in his life. If he ends up risking his life breaking into this place, which is full of monsters, all because I was kidnapped, then I'd rather. Ayla Triss, you've been watching over Taylor all this time, so you know perfectly well that he's the kind of guy that becomes stronger with each hardship in his way. The protagonist of Less Than Sylvania's failed swordmaster greater than, Taylor McClure. A boy, who had faced countless hardships in his life but grew stronger because of them. If I were in his place, I would never want to live a life like that. However, it wasn't about me. It was about him. Just think of it as another hardship that will make him stronger as he moves forward. All you have to do is leave it to him, all right? That's not something you can say when all you're doing is receiving his help. Of course, we should also thank him. Either way, the important thing is that you stop jumping to conclusions, quit making a fuss, and stop being so nervous. Honest to a fault, you just have to believe in him. He'll definitely come to your rescue. Got it. After saying all of that, Ayla's defensive stance seemed to be a little more relaxed than before. It would have been great if she stopped whining. I was sure that she was probably at least a little bit better. Ed Roth's Taylor, I had no idea you would say such a thing. Me, I saw you insulting, looking down on Taylor. Well, that is true. As far as I knew, Ed was definitely that type of person. Well, I had a reason for that. Don't try to figure everything out. If explaining something became too annoying or was something you couldn't say, it would be best to just gloss over it quickly. I didn't want to tell her everything unnecessarily and I don't want to get involved with her any deeper than I had to. Please just stay quiet and patiently sit down as we wait for Taylor. Don't waste your energy for no reason. Since I didn't want to say anything unnecessary, I just sat there with my mouth tightly shut. I had checked as much as I could have before I had been kidnapped. So far, it seemed that there hadn't been any major cracks or twists. As long as I sat still like I was doing, it should have been enough. After sitting in the prison cell like that for a while, I heard something. Young Master Ed, are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere? Is that a major wound on your forearm? Do you feel exhausted at all because of your response to magic power? Is your vision all right? Are there any problems with your sense of smell or hearing? Is the sensation at the tip of your fingers down to your toes all okay? Do you feel tired or exhausted in any way? Did your complexion worsen in any way, or did your heart rate accelerate too high? How about your pulse? Mug suddenly appeared in between the bars, bombarding me with a strange number of detailed questions about my physical condition. Since I was only following your reaction to magic power, I was a bit late. Young Master Ed's spiritual resonance level was still at a normal level, so with some time, I was able to detect it. Even though I may be worthless, please accept my apologies. I'm sorry that I couldn't see you for that short while. I reached out my hand pleasantly towards Mug, who was greeting me politely. Where had the little guy been all that time? It was tiring having to talk to Ayla, who kept defending herself with those sharp comments of hers. I was really glad that I would have someone else to talk to before the rescue team arrived. Mug, you were able to find where I was. Yes, I was quite surprised as well. I had no idea that there was a laboratory this deep in the underground waterways. I had no idea the size would be this big, either. That professor. I was wondering where he was going to spend all of his money, but he ended up creating this. Did he manage to sneak into the deepest part of the laboratory by flying around with that small body of his? I could say with certainty, Yenikar's assessment of him as a competent spirit wasn't a lie at all. I was really surprised when you ended up being subdued back at Trix Hall. I'm so relieved to see that you aren't hurt. Anywhere. Yeah, thanks for worrying about me, Mug. Is that a spirit? Is that really one? Ayla was also well versed in spiritual studies. With some level of resonance, she seemed to be reacting to Mug's appearance. Though, it seemed that she didn't have a high enough resonance level to be able to communicate with Mug. It also seemed like she couldn't hear him. Ed Roth's Taylor, you can deal with spirits. But last semester, couldn't you just barely manage beginner elemental magic? Well, it's none of your business, right? Well, this time I responded with something that would blindside her. She started to get a bit timid, knowing that what I said was true. However, when she started to act shy, she really acted shy. That made it impossible to figure out the rhythm I needed to match to her. Well, if there's a spirit, and you can handle it, then that means you can send a request for help. You can notify the school faculty members and other professors that are able to deal with spirits about the situation. There was no need for me to reiterate that there was no way that I was going to do something that would increase the chances of creating variables. As I considered how to respond, Mug suddenly spoke up. There's no need to worry, young Master Ed. I have already informed the most reliable person, Lady Yenikar, of the entire situation. I'm too useless and undeserving, so I couldn't keep young Master Ed safe by myself. However, I've been trained more than anyone else on the emergency reporting system. What did you say? Ha. It's a bit embarrassing to say this myself, but I'm very calm when it comes to situations like this. Knowing what to do or how to act, I've memorized the rules when it comes to something like this, to the point that it's second nature. Soon, Lady Yenikar will come to rescue you. Either she will come by herself, or she will come leading a party. Either way, she will come down here and save you somehow, so don't be too worried. Let's stay calm while we wait here. What is he saying? That little. You reported it to Yenikar. When? It took me half a day to get here due to avoiding the eyes of the countless monsters, golems, and researchers. It must have been about 2 days by now. Come to think of it, the story was like that. Originally, Ayla had been kidnapped and brought over to the laboratory, which meant that the Sage's seal resonance transferal had gone as scheduled and that the first phase of the storyline had already begun. That meant that, according to the storyline, Taylor's rescue plan should already have been underway. Lady Yenikar's face when she got angry was so beautiful, cute even, though the coldness that was in her anger was real. That's why, she'll definitely be down here soon to rescue you. Ed Roth's Taylor, why is your expression like that? Not only that, but that Firefox merchant and the small magician that wears that big hat and comes to visit the camp so often seemed like they might join in as well. With those three, it was basically like having a million troops. So don't worry one bit, young Master Ed. Even though I may be weak, I'm quick to take action. Ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. I took a deep breath before hitting myself in the cheeks a few times. I changed my mind. I can't stay trapped here. I have to get out. Why young Master Ed? Why did he go and do something that I didn't ask him to do? Since this situation was urgent, I'd put off scolding and complaining at him later. Anyway, I know the structure of the laboratory and where all the core items were quite well. It's quite obvious where they all were. Listen well, Mug. I thought about hitting him with a big finger flick right away, but I decided to calm down first. I shouldn't be swayed by my emotions. I whispered all sorts of instructions to Mug. I understand. Hey you, the researcher at the end of the hallway. Coom, clang, clang, clang. After catching my breath for a bit, I stood up and began to bang on the bars. Seeing me suddenly change expressions and start pounding on the bars, Ayla's expression became completely dumbfounded. There was no time for me to be bothered by that. I grabbed onto Mug, holding him tightly as I continued making noise. This isn't right. Get me out of here. I really can't stay here. I'm not joking. Ed Roth's Taylor. You're too noisy. If you continue talking like that, that devil across from us will wake up. The devil that was asleep on the other side of us was intentionally put in that condition using sleeping magic. But it wasn't a type of magic that was absolutely effective, so Coom came over just in case. You were so quiet and collected before, but now you're making such a ruckus about how you're treated all of a sudden. Is it because you started to realize that the situation is scary after organizing your thoughts? It's not like that. I told you I have to get out of here. Ah, seriously, as expected, you are a student around that age after all. There's nothing I can do, try and not worry too much. As long as you keep doing what you're told, we won't harm you in. I'm being serious right now. You'll all be in big trouble if you don't let me out of here right now. It's not me who's going to get in trouble, it's you guys. To start believing in you now, that's not right. Ha, fine. It's weird to try and hold only my sense of logic in the situation anyway. He didn't know how much of it was a lie and how much was the truth. The symbolic meaning that came from being the top student in each grade was significant. Those who maintained a hard-working academic lifestyle, with the appropriate results to prove it. Those who might become Sylvania Academy's greatest result were regarded with the most upright care within an academy environment. In addition, they were allowed to live in the most luxurious academic facility, Offellis Hall. They were given priority when using all academic facilities and, as long as there was no major disciplinary action, their entire tuition and living expenses would be covered. They were even given more practical influence besides just a convenient lifestyle. Being recognized by representatives during the student presidential election, their single voice would actually count as dozens. They could even make official proposals to the school council. Usually, they didn't exercise such authority because they were busy studying. Also, there was the fact that it was quite embarrassing to do such things while they were still just students. Either way, the top students of each grade were talented individuals that couldn't easily be ignored. They were people who had the authority, social recognition, and power to go and do what they wanted anywhere, without feeling inferior in any way. First year Lucy Mariel, second year Yennecar Polarover, third year Duke Aldauger, fourth year Amy, they were all individuals who had surpassed the average level of students, true to the name of Sylvania. Among them, the first and second year top students had a much more overwhelming amount of fighting power. With me being trapped, the subjugation force would be way too strong for the storyline's level, which was supposed to be taking place currently. Well, regardless of me, everyone was going to end up being completely destroyed, so, was there even a meaning to shout at them in the first place? They were going to be destroyed by Taylor anyway. If you continue being noisy like that, I'll have to resort to using force. Stay quiet. Clang. After threatening us by hitting the bars, Coom returned back to his place and sat down. What's with you all of a sudden? Ed Roth's Taylor. You said earlier that if I just waited quietly then Taylor would definitely come to rescue us. Shish. As I waved my arms and signaled for her to be quiet, Ayla curled up screeching with that same old overreaction of hers. In her eyes, just how far down had the image of me fallen? I didn't have time to think about that as I walked back further inside, my arms held out. It was really there. The key holder. I brought it. As I caught the attention of the guard, Mug carefully appeared, going to the corner and taking a bundle of keys from the key holder. As I was already familiar with the main objects and core elements in Glass's secret laboratory, I could give Mug proper instructions. After all, I'd broken into this same prison multiple times over. Anyway, I could effectively use my base knowledge of less than Sylvania's failed swordmaster greater than like that. I picked up the bundle of keys as I carefully inserted them, one by one, so Coom wouldn't hear it. It didn't take long before one of the keys snapped into place and the door squeaked open. I stuck my head out and I glanced at Coom at the end of the hall. He didn't seem to have heard the door opening, as he was concentrating on reviewing all of the research data. All right, let's escape, Mug. While he's caught up in his research, he won't move one bit unless there's a fuss like before. Indeed. As expected of young Master Ed. What a quick analysis of the situation. I don't know just how you knew the exact location of the key, but in my eyes you're detailed and appropriate instructions. Since it was obvious Mug would just continue giving me a bunch of compliments, I quickly recalled him. Either way, he would keep following me. Next time, I'd have to talk to him about doing things I didn't tell him to. After sneaking out of the slightly opened door, Ayla suddenly started to tremble and make a fuss. In a matter of minutes, I suddenly ended up with the key and escaped. The prison door was open. The person who opened it was none other than Ed Roth's tailor, a person that she considered an enemy. It must have been confusing. Squeak. I closed the prison door like it was before. Why you? Listen well, Ayla Triss. I spoke while looking straight at Ayla, who was still in the cell. You will wait here. There was no reason to take Ayla out as well. For the main storyline, Ayla needs to stay locked in for Taily to come and rescue her. If the storyline was going to stay the same up to the point where they were at the top of the Tower of Magic Power, then Ayla would need to remain as a hostage. But even then, I feel like complete trash having to just leave her locked up like that. I didn't know what kind of extreme behavior she would exhibit after I left her alone. At least for the time being, I needed to make her feel somewhat safe. Outside of this laboratory there are all kinds of experimented monsters, celestial researchers, magic books with souls, as well as golems and guards that will be running around. It's dangerous to move alone, but if we end up getting caught together then even you will be caught up in serious danger. Do you understand? That's. When you are being held as hostage, the best thing that you can do is be obedient. Don't go around getting hurt by rebelling in some sort of stupid fashion. If Coom finds out that I'm missing while he's on guard, just sell me out and tell him that I escaped. He'll believe that you were truly just sitting around here in your cell. He won't suspect you, that way, no harm will come to you. I locked the door as I put the key away. And either way, you can't run. Your legs don't have any strength, right? Ayla curled up in surprise, perhaps because I had discovered that her legs were shaking. I'll take responsibility and bring down the rescue team, so you just sit here and breathe. Okay, I don't really need to explain the obvious to you, but this prison is the safest place in this secret laboratory. Trying to escape for no reason is like walking on a tightrope with your life on the line. Got it. But, Ed, please just answer with a yes or no instead of some random nonsense. Got it. That's all that I asked. As I pushed her a bit, Ayla continued trembling and nodded her head. All right, at least she was acting a bit more obedient. All right, just hold your breath and keep silent. I'll do my best. I slipped out, lowering my body and hiding myself behind the hallway cabinets. At the end of the hall, Coom continued to review the research data. I decided that I didn't have another choice but to match my timing with his. I'd have to exit near his desk on his next patrol. It might have seemed like I was literally putting my life on the line, but there was a reason for me to take action. Yeah, to be blunt, I honestly kind of expected some sort of change in the flow of the storyline. Looking back on all the previous episodes I was caught up in, there was no way I could honestly think that everything would go smoothly and without incident. I was just relieved that the situation was progressing rather smoothly. But there was no doubt that something had gotten twisted. If it was just a slight change, somehow I would be able to manage it. My specs had risen quite a bit, so as long as I made good use of my future knowledge, I should have been able to handle most of the problems that would arise. As for Yennecar and Lortel's involvement, I should have been able to solve it as long as I could meet up with them and explain things well. However, there were bound to be variables that I wouldn't be able to handle with my own two hands. I took a deep breath. Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster, Act 2's final chapter. The Glassed Subjugation. In that storyline, if you got caught up in a certain route then you wouldn't be able to escape a bad ending. That small magician who wears that big hat and comes to visit the camp so often seemed to be joining. The first-year top student, and Act 3's final boss. The extraordinary genius, Lucy Mariel. Her participation in the battle was by no means good news. The problem didn't stem from the bosses that she would casually sweep away with her tremendous power. If there was suddenly a change or some type of variable that was not originally in the main storyline, it could be solved in some way or another. After all, most of the bad endings that already existed were things that I could work out in some way or another. However, there were definitely a few bad ending routes that were difficult to solve with my position, no matter what I did. Bad ending number 27, Lazy Lucy. The conditions for it were that Professor Glast and Lucy Mariel encountered each other in some way after the incident. A route in which Professor Glast, who would be pushed into a corner, ended up persuading Lucy to join his side and making her become an enemy. Once that started, a bad ending would occur after the battle with Lucy. After listening to Professor Glast, who had already given up on everything, and his final offer, Lucy would suddenly grow extremely hostile. You were not meant to win in a face-off against Lucy Mariel in Act 2. As for a way to beat her during Act 2, even though countless professionals and dedicated users agonized for over hundreds of hours, trying to find a means to win, no one had succeeded. No matter what, I have to somehow stop Professor Glast from meeting Lucy Mariel. Using Mug, I can feel them down in the underground waterways. The reaction I got from the school's faculty and other professors was rather indifferent. I think I'll have to go and see for myself. You're going to come help me too, right Lucy? I'd feel so relieved if I knew you were coming. Lucy started to wonder if she really needed her help. Yennecar Polarover was already strong enough, and Lucy was an extremely lazy individual. But there was something strangely powerful in the words Yennecar Polarover had spoken. Hearing that lively, over-the-top tone of voice of hers, with that strangely serious expression, even Lucy, who had no interest in the world, felt moved. She was starting to feel an emptiness inside of her in the first place. Yugaham. Lying on the roof of the cabin, which was made with poor craftsmanship, she stretched her body and made a chicken-like sound. Holding her witch's hat in her arms, she shook her head with messy eyes. Lucy turned upside down as she stared blankly at the campfire. The campfire that hadn't been lit for a few days. While she didn't know if it was a big deal or not, she did love hearing its crackling sound as she took her naps. She also liked the pungent smell and bitter taste of the beef jerky, and the way he would pick her up and carry her when she was lying down and sleeping deeply, throwing her onto her bed. Well, it was a bit annoying, but it was very comfortable overall. Lucy, who looked up at the starry sky for a while and rolled her small body over, suddenly remembered the old days. The back of an old man with wrinkled fingers. A large and clear full moon was high in the sky. The girl, who was kicking her feet in the air and looking up at the moon, had already become a part of the landscape. Before long, a faint voice seeped through the night air like paint. I miss him. What's lost is lost. Even though she knew the fact that loneliness, which was something that would show up from time to time, was something that couldn't be shaken out of one's heart no matter how strong they may be. He has already gone. The time to be heartbroken over that established fact had already passed. Nevertheless, the loneliness that person had left behind left a mark on her small heart. Even if she knew that she couldn't see him anymore, it was an entirely different matter. Chapter 55. Glast Subjugation War 4. When too many things happen all at once such that my head goes into overdrive, rationality always comes lagging behind, taking its sweet time to return. That's why it took some time for Aila to regain her senses. The fact that the demon in the underground sewer across from her had succumbed entirely to the sleep spell, never to wake up. If she did not resist and just sat quietly in the prison cell, it seemed she would not face any immediate threat to her personal safety. The realization that her racing mind had finally calmed down somewhat. The amalgamation of these factors finally allowed her to regain composure, and her trembling legs came to a halt. Tylee. Buried in her knees, she plaintively called out that name, but there was still a long time to go before Tylee would arrive. Aila, however, had vaguely known this. Tylee would definitely come to rescue her. Yet the shame and resentment of always being nothing more than a burden weighed heavily on her. A mix of sorrow and self-loathing surged in her chest. It wasn't a lack of trying on her part. Aila may have been desperately lacking in innate talent in the combat field, but her proficiency in intellectual and scholarly disciplines was not to be underestimated. Her ability to grasp and implement magical knowledge was acknowledged by even Professor Glast, a testament to her potential as a scholar. However, it was maddening and abominable to acknowledge that, without help, she couldn't do anything on her own. More humiliating than any other incompetence was her own sense of powerlessness. Once again, she would have to rely on the help of numerous others. Even the aid of Ed Rothtailor, a man she loathed so much that just seeing his face made her grind her teeth, was sought. He left Aila alone inside the safe cell and went out on his own to tackle the situation. Looking back, there was no way to politely express how unbelievable it was, but he had considered the flustered Aila in his actions. Honestly, it was more frightening than reassuring. The mere thought of raising one's hand could make one flinch at the prospect of receiving a slap. Resentment. Emotions are always followed by expectations. The shape of those expectations differs with each individual. Just as one might wish for their beloved to always be righteous and good, they also expect the object of their resentment and hatred to be evil, twisted, and mean-spirited. After all, such alignments grant justification and righteousness to oneself in their opposition. But to admit that the despised individual is also upright, has their own beliefs and sense of justice, and depending on the perspective, could be reasonable, admitting this does not come easily to one's pride. Yet, Aila couldn't help but acknowledge this fact. The reputation surrounding Ed at the academy, the full support shown by the second-year top ranker, his decisive and composed attitude during the Glasgow incident. Moreover, despite being kidnapped together, he showed no signs of panic, maintaining a composed demeanor. In dealing with Aila, who behaved antagonistically and warily towards him, Ed displayed no hurt feelings. Aila knew what to call such a temperament. It was tolerance. Whether deliberately causing harm, placing blame, speaking ill, or even attempting to exploit, everything was within his realm of control. The balance of power was completely in Ed's favor, be it sheer physical strength, magical ability, or even in terms of mental fortitude. Despite this, Ed appeared to want to help and save Aila rather than just leaving her to her fate, a stark contrast to the arrogant attitude he displayed during the entrance exams. If only he had been this way from the start. Why had he acted so foolishly during the entrance exams, thus earning such resentment? Even though he seemed ready to play the part of a senior, dealing with urgent matters with gravity and seriousness, he asserted that Tylee would be sure to come to the rescue, showing an absolute trust in Tylee. Why then had he acted so poorly towards Tylee during the entrance exams, ruining his own reputation? Aila Triss. You've been watching Tylee for a while now, so you would know, but that guy grows stronger with each trial. In a critical situation, his voice was as rooted and unshakable as an ancient tree. Aila knew. Tylee almost seemed fated for adversity, as if their life was filled with nothing but trials. And with each obstacle surmounted, they climbed another step of growth. It's certain that it won't end up being good. So, won't you wait just a bit longer? Even if it takes time, I'll take responsibility and secure the seal again myself. What on earth are you talking about? Frustration surged within Lortel's chest. The principal of Sylvania Academy, Obel Forcius, was nothing short of a monster, a master in every field. Whether it was actual combat power or magical capability, the only one in the faculty and students of the academy who could truly measure up to Obel was the lazy genius of the first year, Lucy Mayrill. If Obel Forcius were to roll up his sleeves and step in personally, no matter what Glass tried, he would be subdued in an instant. But Obel only issued a search order to his staff and did not intend to step in personally. Seeing such an attitude, Lortel wanted to press him to retrieve the seal himself, but given the difference in their positions, it was awkward to urge him to that extent. So, Lortel listened with a focus to understand just what he was saying. And then an unbelievably harsh truth invaded his ears. What Professor Glast was researching through Saint Tyr magic was the traditionally forbidden realm of resurrection magic. No matter how limitless the pursuit of academia, there were clearly realms of magic in its long history that were taboo. 3 areas defied the laws of the world, obscuring the flow of the present and rejecting the framework of fate for humans: the pursuit of eternal life, raising the dead, and reversing time. These were taboos, challenging the providence by twisting fate and defying the divine will granted to the human race. No matter how much Saint Tyr magic avenues there were that dealt with time itself, altering the already determined past was not tolerated. After all, there are scant mages that have even reached such a level to begin with. You knew about this, and let it slide, Principal. That's a tricky issue. I did receive all the reports on the research records of Professor Glast, but he wouldn't blatantly report such wayward research in writing, would he? It was just a guess, now it's a certainty. He had a habit of lavishly praising the great sage of Sylvania. Considering reports on Professor Glast's research achievements, his past, and his proclivities, it was enough to think in that direction. But there could be no assurance. Lortel glanced around at the expressions of the other academy staff. Vice Principal Rachel and Chief Dean McDowell had their eyes closed meditatively. However, other academy staff seemed utterly oblivious, surprised as if hearing it for the first time. It had been a secret that only a few amongst the staff knew. Not to speak ill but, Headmaster Obel, you want to ask if I've lost my mind, Lortel Cahelm. But, I am, at least, curious about Glast's last choice. What do you mean by that? Do you remember what Professor Glast used to say habitually? His angst over the advancement of scholarship. His respect for the true scholar, the great sage Sylvania, and the pining over what was lost. For Lortel, who knew of Professor Glast's past, these were words that couldn't be taken lightly. Everyone lies to themselves to some degree. It was an obsession with talent that defined the man known as Professor Glast. Yet Lortel had his suspicions. Was this obsession truly a reflection of Glast's sincere nature? Or was it merely a defensive mechanism resulting from the anguish of what he had lost? That intense fixation on the value of talent, which he believes should never be presumed if it seems superficial and fleeting. It could be as simple as it appears, a father's sentiment, futile in an effort to make his daughter's untimely death not be in vain. Was he a lofty academic or a grief-stricken father? Unable to easily categorize Professor Glast, Lortel felt engulfed in confusion. If he truly discovered saint-tier magic capable of reviving the dead. The great sage Sylvania, a saint who would dramatically advance the world and revolutionize the history of magic. Murray, his daughter, who died tragically after being prematurely encouraged to trust her ambiguous talent. Do you think, who Professor Glast would try to revive? Lortel looked up at Obel. The depths of his eyes, as vast as the sea, gave no indication of what he might be seeing. Bang. Trouble, Headmaster Obel. We have sighting information from the academic building. The studious student Tiley was seen chasing Professor Glast, who was fleeing toward the sewer just minutes ago. According to eyewitnesses, it's not just the seal, he's also kidnapped a student. Confirmed identities include, a first year from the magic department, Aila Triss, and a second year, Ed Rothtaylor. Kaboom. Just then, as Lortel couldn't believe what he heard, a massive bang rang out across the sky above the academic buildings, followed by vibrations. Lortel darted down the hallway and flung open a window. From the Trix Pavilion located on the hill on the outskirts of the academic building, you could approximately see the whole academic district. Near the coast off Akan Island, where the sewer entrance lay, he saw a familiar, and frankly too familiar, high-ranking spirit. Though it was incredibly far in terms of distance, its massive size was clearly visible even from this Trix Pavilion. The high-ranking fire spirit, Tarkon. The fearsome fire lizard that only the ace members of the first year could barely subdue if they all went at it together. Its roaring and thrashing tail seemed like a petulant child demanding someone be brought immediately. A single high-ranking spirit was enough to require top students to emerge to subdue it without damage. If left alone, who knows what could happen. It seemed unlikely that the Sylvania Institute would be affected as it was heading towards the outskirts of Akan Island. Yet in the worst case, the agitation could result in the loss of the seal. After all, they hadn't even paid the price yet, so even if the seal was lost, there would be no direct loss on the ledgers, there might be lost profits but not a deficit. Nonetheless, the seal, I want it too badly. Ah, seriously. Ultimately, Lortel sighed, pulling at his hair. Nothing ever seemed to go right. With things like this, I'm going to the sewer as well. Excuse me, Commissioner, what about the empathic ritual? The company's staff looked at Lortel in shock, but Lortel shook his head. And he gave Headmaster Obel a glaring look. Despite the rudeness, Obel seemed unperturbed. With the principal showing such indifference, I will have to go and get the seal myself. Everyone follow me except for a minimum negotiation team. Sigh. 5 minutes before the Grand Chaos Party, It was only a matter of time before Ed's clothes would burst. The greatest victim might be Professor Glast. To blame him for a rash decision for kidnapping a ticking time bomb worse than AILA, he was dealt with severely limited information. There was no one to offer a moment of silence. Reverse journey. The endgame scenario, which flows from the Trix Pavilion, academic building chase route, sewer entrance, deepest part of the sewer, secret research facility entrance, Soul Library, monster research wing, deep within the research room, was a familiar route. However, retracing this route in reverse was an amusing experience. Most likely, Tylee would be on the regular course, so they could run into each other somewhere in the middle. I escaped from the deepest part of the research room and carefully passed by the monster research wing. Breaking through the monster research wing was not difficult. Most of the monsters were confined to the research facilities, and the area didn't have many permanent staff. This part tends to be difficult because Kum would release all the confined monsters from the research facilities. However, there were no obstacles now. The problem was the Soul Library. Librarian Reina, who guarded the Soul Library, had excellent observation skills and was adept at detection magic. Even the lower spirit muck took a long while to sneak in with its weak force. I leaned against the back door of the library and took a quick look inside. The floating shelves and spellbooks. And all kinds of precious magical engineering equipment and formulas. Given I've made it this far, I wanted to sweep them all up and take them with me. It makes sense to grab everything I can while I'm here anyway. Right now, escaping this research facility to meet up with Yenica is the priority, so I should just choose the most efficient items. I must do so without drawing Reina's attention. Ed, sir, are you perhaps drooling? Quote. I quickly composed my expression and checked the items I needed to take. Reina's patrol patterns and behaviors were simpler than expected. It wouldn't take too long to collect everything. To inflate my magical engineering skills on this rare opportunity did make me feel a bit giddy. Especially as my specs have been plateauing lately. With the right materials, I could craft magical engineering gear that shouldn't exist in a level 2 to 3 arc, an opportunity indeed. My heart pounded with anticipation. Nevertheless, I couldn't get too immersed in collecting formulas and magical engineering gear. First, I stuffed as much as I could carry on my person and planned to return after Tylee had passed to collect the rest slowly. My priority was to meet with Yenica. Still, the thrill of a windfall fluttered in my heart. A bargain sale. Where's Ed? The mid-boss of the second phase of the Glass Subjugation second act, Dorothy Whitepelts. She held considerable pride in her abilities. Dorothy, a third year, was recognized as a combative alchemist in the alchemy division. Not the valedictorian of her entire class, but she made it to the top of the alchemy division. Using all sorts of combat serums, instant chemical reactions, and mass-produced magical engineering goods, Dorothy's prowess in combat was troublesome even for combat division students. The top alchemy students of both the first year, Elvira, and the second year, Norton, often came seeking her guidance. For Dorothy, Professor Glast, who recognized her talent when it was yet to blossom, was a benefactor. When all had underestimated Dorothy's capabilities, only Glast had affirmed her. If it was Professor Glast, he must have had a reason for his seemingly aggressive actions. Thus, Dorothy gladly took part in Glast's plan. Though she might not know the exact intentions, she decided to fulfill his request to guard the entrance to the sewer. Quote. But still, that's a bit much, isn't it, Professor? Musing to herself, Dorothy sat by the shallow stream of the sewer entrance, forced to face Tarkon's bellowing maw as if to incinerate the world. Where's Ed? She was familiar with that rosy-haired girl. The beloved princess of the academy. Where she walked, they say flowers bloom. Her bright smile supposedly warmed the hearts of those who see it. That comforting smile was still present. The beaming face so charming and adorable, if you lost focus, you might reach out to stroke her hair. Yet, there would be none who could. Above her, a massive lizard blazed with fire, dripping saliva. While Yenica was trying her best to ask politely and considerately, the disparity with that backdrop only intensified a sense of fear. Yes, Yenica. So, I'm just here to guard this spot. I was just following orders. Yeah. Startled, Dorothy stuttered out her words. Ah, I see. Oh, wait, you're a third-year senior. I'm sorry for speaking informally, I was out of it. Dorothy's response showed understanding and then a hesitant, polite apology. Only then did Dorothy intuitively realize that the good-hearted Yenika was indeed in front of her, about to relax in. But with that said, where's Ed? The kind-hearted Yenika notwithstanding, the heat of the seething lizard had no mercy in dealing with Dorothy. Dorothy felt her strength wane, tumbling down helplessly.